Hey there, tonight we're uncovering New Year's Eve during the Black Death, where even amidst the shadows of despair, people clung to hope with astonishing resilience. What you're about to discover will challenge your notions of joy in the darkest times. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. If you've ever thought your New Year's Eve was a bit of a downer, spare a thought for the folks ringing in the year 1348. They were smack dab in the middle of the Black Death, and it wasn't exactly a time for popping champagne and making resolutions to hit the medieval gym more often. Nope, this was about survival, raw, unfiltered, and terrifying. The Black Death, or the bubonic plague as it's also known, rolled into Europe like an unwanted in-law around 1347 and overstayed its welcome by a devastating 5 years. And boy, did it make an entrance. By the time it left, it had wiped out an estimated 25 to 30 million people in Europe alone, which was about a third of the continent's population. Talk about a killer party. The grim statistics are enough to make anyone want to hide under their medieval bed. In some places, entire villages were erased from existence, their residents decimated by a disease they couldn't even begin to understand. This was a time when the average person's understanding of medicine was about as advanced as a flat earther's grasp of astronomy. Theories about the plague's cause ranged from the wrath of God to bad air, or miasma, as they called it, to a cosmic alignment of planets that was just a bit too aggressive. Spoiler alert, the leeches were definitely not the hero in this story, no matter how many times medieval doctors slapped them onto a patient. So, how did this all begin? Well, the Black Death likely started in Central Asia and hitched a ride to Europe via trade routes. The Silk Road, already famous for bringing luxury goods to Europe, decided to throw in a side of plague-infested rats as a bonus. These furry little carriers of doom hopped onto merchant ships, spreading the disease faster than a medieval gossip scandal. By 1347, the plague had reached the bustling trade city of Kaffa on the Black Sea before making its way to Italy and across Europe. It was like a twisted game of tag where everyone was it, and there was no safe zone. Now, you might be wondering how on earth people managed to celebrate anything during such a cataclysmic time. I mean, who's in the mood for a party when your neighbor just keeled over and the local doctor is prescribing, try not to breathe so much? Yet, somehow, New Year still held a place in people's hearts, if only as a brief escape from the chaos. In a world where the future was as uncertain as a medieval fortune-teller's predictions, marking the passage of time was an act of defiance, a way of saying, we're still here, and we're not going down without a fight. The economic impact of the plague was another grim twist in this saga. With so many people dying, the labor force took a nosedive, leading to a kind of medieval recession. Fields lay fallow, crops rotted, and trade slowed to a crawl. The laws of supply and demand went a bit haywire. Fewer workers meant higher wages for those who survived, but with fewer goods being produced, prices for essentials skyrocketed. It was a buyer's market if you were shopping for land or a new serf, but not so much if you needed bread or, a good physician. Amid all this economic chaos, bizarre medical theories flourished like weeds in a neglected garden. Doctors of the day, if you could call them that, believed the plague was caused by everything from astrology to a particularly bad batch of air. Remedies ranged from the nonsensical to the downright dangerous. Bloodletting was all the rage, because, naturally, losing blood was exactly what a person on the brink of death needed. Then there were the poultices made of boiled onions, arsenic, and crushed emeralds, which probably did more harm than good. And let's not forget the leeches, those little vampires that were thought to suck out the bad blood, but likely just added to the patient's woes. Despite the horrors unfolding around them, people still found ways to cling to hope. Celebrating New Year was less about revelry and more about resilience. In some regions, communities would gather in churches to pray for relief, hoping that the next year would bring something, anything, better than the last. Others might have hosted more subdued gatherings, sharing whatever meager food and drink they could muster. It was a way to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a world turned upside down. They didn't have fireworks or countdowns, but they had something more profound, a shared human spirit determined to endure against all odds. As we move through this historical deep dive, keep in mind that while the romantic image of people dancing merrily into the new year might be appealing, the truth was a lot darker. Yet, in those dim candle-lit rooms, surrounded by the spectre of death, the real story was one of tenacity and the unyielding desire to see another day. Because if anything, the people of this era were survivors, and their story is a testament to the endurance of the human spirit in even the bleakest of times. So, while the medieval world teetered on the brink of collapse, communities found a peculiar kind of sanctuary in those New Year traditions. It was like hanging a keep calm and carry on poster in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, a bit of a stretch, but oddly comforting. Picture this. Clusters of weary souls, determined to find a flicker of hope in the heart of darkness, gathered together to mark the passage of time. It was less about ringing in the new year with jubilation and more about whispering, "We're still here," into the abyss. Now, let's yank back the curtain on some of those medieval myths, shall we? Despite popular belief, these folks weren't exactly throwing lavish feasts and donning party hats. Sure, there might have been some semblance of celebration, but it was more like a summer toast with whatever dubious brew they could muster. After all, when your pantry is as empty as a knight's helmet after a joust, you tend to get creative with your festivities. And speaking of creativity, let's chat about the role of religious and secular leaders in keeping the public morale from plummeting into a pit of despair. In a time when the plague was as ubiquitous as chainmail at a medieval fair, these leaders took on the task of providing a semblance of stability. The church, ever the bastion of medieval life, played a critical role in this endeavor. While some might call it divine intervention, others might argue it was just good old-fashioned community building. Religious services, though tinged with the morbid reality of the times, became pivotal gatherings. Clergy members, who were dropping like flies themselves, mind you, offered solace and hope, encouraging the faithful to pray for relief. Because, hey, when the world's falling apart, a little divine intervention can't hurt, right? Meanwhile, secular leaders had their own bag of tricks. They were like medieval motivational speakers, rallying the troops with promises of better days. In cities like Florence and Paris, officials organized public works projects, not just to keep the economy from flatlining, but to give people a purpose. The idea was to distract from the grim reality, like whistling past the graveyard, but with more digging and less whistling. These projects, though born out of necessity, inadvertently laid the groundwork for future urban development. It's a bit like accidentally planting a tree while trying to bury a treasure map. Sometimes, unexpected things take root. But let's not get too carried away with the notion of benevolent leaders single-handedly saving the day. They had their own interests to protect, and keeping the populace from descending into chaos was a strategic move. After all, a stable realm was far easier to govern than a panicked, plague-ridden mob. It was a delicate balancing act, akin to juggling flaming torches with one hand tied behind your back. Yet, despite the chaos, a surprising number of these leaders managed to keep the wheels from completely falling off the medieval cart. Of course, human nature being what it is, not everyone played by the rules. The tension between survival instincts and societal expectations played out in fascinating ways. Some communities, gripped by fear, turned to scapegoating, blaming marginalized groups like the Jews for the plague's devastation. It was a dark chapter in humanity's history, an unfortunate reminder of how easily fear can override compassion. This fueled anti-Semitic violence, leading to tragic pogroms across parts of Europe, a sobering backdrop to any New Year reflection. Meanwhile, for those who managed to keep their wits about them, the New Year offered a chance to reset, even if only symbolically. It was a moment to pause and gather their scattered thoughts, to cling to the hope that perhaps this year things might just be different. The promise of a fresh start, however illusory, was a powerful motivator. And while the realities of life, the empty fields, the eerie silence of the towns, the ever-present spectre of death, couldn't be ignored, people found ways to adapt. In the countryside, where communities were smaller and often more isolated, the New Year might be marked by simpler traditions. Perhaps a communal meal, shared among neighbors who were more like extended family, provided a sense of solidarity. These gatherings, though meager, were rich in camaraderie. It was a time for storytelling, sharing tales of past victories and losses, weaving the fabric of community tighter even as the world threatened to unravel it. In the cities, where the plague had hit hardest, the scene was a bit more desperate. But even here, the human spirit showed remarkable resilience. People turned to music and art, expressions of creativity that defied the grim reality outside their doors. Artists and musicians became chroniclers of their time, capturing both the despair and the flickers of hope in their work. It was a renaissance of sorts, born of necessity rather than luxury, yet nonetheless profound. As the calendar turned, those who survived the year before were faced with the same question: what now? The answer was as varied as the people who pondered it. Some looked to the future with a cautious optimism, others with weary skepticism. But regardless of their outlook, one thing was clear: life, as fragile and unpredictable as it was, persisted. And so, the tale of New Year during the Black Death is one of contradictions. It's a story of grim realities and stubborn hope, of communities clinging to tradition even as the world crumbled around them. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the determination to find light in the darkest of times. And while the romantic notion of revelry might be a myth, the truth, that people found ways to endure, to connect, to hope, is far more compelling. As we venture further into this historical journey, keep these threads in mind. They weave a tapestry that is both tragic and triumphant, a reminder that even at the edge of collapse, humanity finds a way to carry on. And while the Black Death would eventually loosen its grip, the echoes of its impact would resonate for generations, reshaping societies in ways both subtle and profound. But that, my friends, is a story for another day. As the Black Death loosened its grip, the economic landscape of medieval Europe was left in a state of disarray that was both terrifying and, surprisingly, full of opportunity. Picture a medieval economy that's just been through a blender. The plague had essentially turned the labor market on its head, like a game of musical chairs where half the players had vanished. But here's the kicker. Out of this chaos emerged a financial boom for the survivors that no one saw coming. It's like the universe handed them lemons, and a few savvy folks made a lemonade empire. Let's tackle the myth of the medieval economic apocalypse. The narrative that the Black Death left Europe in absolute economic ruin is about as accurate as a medieval map. Sure, the immediate aftermath was a mess. With up to 60% of the population wiped out in some areas, fields were left unattended, and livestock wandered aimlessly like medieval ghost towns. Yet, this drastic reduction in the labor force meant the surviving workers suddenly found themselves in high demand. Imagine being a medieval farmhand and waking up to find your wages have doubled overnight. It's the kind of plot twist that would make any peasant dance a jig. So why didn't the economy just collapse entirely? The answer is a combination of supply, demand, and a whole lot of sheep. Yes, sheep. With fewer people around, those who survived had more land, more resources, and crucially more bargaining power. It was like a feudal version of Survivor, where the last one standing got the prize. Landowners, desperate to keep their estates going, had to offer higher wages and better conditions to attract workers. It was a workers' market, and boy, did they milk it. Now, let's talk inflation. The plague had caused a massive disruption in agriculture, and with fewer goods being produced, prices for essential items soared. Bread, the staple of medieval life, became more expensive than night out in Paris. However, because wages were rising too, many found themselves better off. It was a peculiar economic paradox. Inflation was rampant, yet the standard of living for many survivors actually improved. It's like the medieval economy took a hard left turn into bizarro world. Meanwhile, the wool industry became the unexpected rock star of the post-plague economy. Europe's love affair with wool was nothing new, but the plague took it to a whole new level. With fewer mouths to feed, landowners converted grain fields to pastures for sheep. The English, in particular, practically wrapped themselves in woolly prosperity. England's wool became the medieval equivalent of Silicon Valley tech stocks. Everyone wanted a piece. The demand for woolen textiles was insatiable, and those clever enough to invest in sheep found themselves sitting on a gold mine. Who knew that being a medieval shepherd could be such a lucrative gig? This wool boom wasn't just about warm socks and cozy tunics. It had a ripple effect across the economy. Towns that were hubs of the textile trade, like Florence and Bruges, thrived. The increased demand for labor in textile production provided jobs not just for skilled artisans, but also for those who'd previously been scraping by. It was a win-win, unless you were allergic to wool. But let's not get too carried away with the idea that everyone lived happily ever after in their woolly wonderlands. The post-plague economic shift also created tensions. The sudden empowerment of the working class didn't sit well with the nobility, who weren't used to bargaining with peasants. This led to a series of revolts across Europe as workers pushed for more rights and better pay. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England is a prime example. It was less of a storm the Bastille moment and more of a we're mad as hell and not going to take it anymore kind of uprising. The rebels demanded an end to serfdom and unfair taxes, and while the revolt was ultimately crushed, it marked a significant shift in the balance of power. For the merchants and tradespeople, the post-plague years were like a golden age. The reduced population meant less competition and more opportunity to expand their businesses. Trade routes, once perilous due to the risk of plague, reopened and thrived. Goods flowed again, and with them, new ideas and technologies. It was the beginning of a slow march towards what would eventually become the Renaissance, a period of rebirth and innovation that would reshape Europe. And what about the myth of the plague as a complete societal reset? It's a romantic notion, this idea that the Black Death swept away the old world and ushered in a new one. In reality, while the plague did accelerate certain changes, it was more like a catalyst than a clean slate. Feudalism didn't vanish overnight, but the seeds of its decline were sown. The power dynamics shifted, and the rigid social structures began to crack. It was the start of a long, slow evolution rather than a revolution. So, what's the takeaway here? The story of the Black Death's economic impact isn't just one of doom and gloom. It's a tale of resilience and adaptation, of people finding ways to thrive, even in the most challenging of circumstances. The survivors didn't just rebuild, they reinvented. They took the shattered pieces of their world and fashioned something new, something unexpected. It's a testament to the indomitable human spirit, the ability to find opportunity in adversity. As we leave behind the medieval wool boom and the rebellious peasants, remember that the echoes of this era would resonate for centuries. The economic shifts set the stage for future transformations, reshaping societies in ways that were both subtle and profound. And while the Black Death was a dark chapter in history, it also illuminated the path to progress, albeit wrapped in a cloak of wool. But my friends, that's a story for another day. Now, let's dive headfirst into the political circus of the Black Death era. As if grappling with a pandemic wasn't enough, rulers across medieval Europe were also engaged in a game of thrones that would make even the most seasoned Netflix binge-watchers' heads spin. With the plague thinning the ranks faster than a battlefield on a bad day, power vacuums popped up like mushrooms after the rain, and everyone wanted a piece of the pie. First, let's talk about the power grabs. Imagine a chessboard where half the pieces suddenly vanish, leaving the remaining pawns, knights, and bishops scrambling for dominance. That's essentially what happened. Monarchs, dukes, and other noble types were dropping like flies, leaving behind a gaping void in leadership. Opportunistic nobles saw this as their moment to shine, or at least to snatch a crown or two. Take King Edward III of England, for instance. He saw the chaos as a golden opportunity to press his claim on the French throne, leading to the 100 Years' War. It was less about family feuds, and more about seizing the moment when France was too busy burying its dead to argue. But with great power grabs came great responsibilities, or at least the illusion of them. Rulers had to keep their kingdoms from imploding while simultaneously dodging the Grim Reaper. The New Year festivities provided the perfect stage for a bit of royal PR. What better way to project strength and stability than by hosting a lavish celebration while your rivals were busy coughing up their lungs? These gatherings were less about merriment and more about sending a clear message. Look at me, still standing, still ruling, and definitely not dying. It was the medieval equivalent of a modern-day leader tweeting victory while the world burns around them. And then there were the peace treaties, hastily scribbled on parchments to avoid further chaos. With so many leaders dropping dead, the medieval political landscape was as unstable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Treaties were signed faster than you could say bubonic. Sometimes they were genuine attempts at peace, but more often than not, They were temporary truces to catch a breath before the next wave of conflict. The Treaty of Braidigny in 1360, for example, was supposed to bring peace between England and France. Spoiler alert, it didn't last. But hey, at least they tried. As for public health policies, let's just say the medieval version made modern lockdowns look like a spa day. Forget about social distancing. Back then, it was more like, stay away from anyone who looks even remotely plague-y. Cities like Venice and Milan were pioneers in quarantine measures, which in those days meant isolating ships and travelers for 40 days, a practice that eventually gave us the term quarantine. It was a rudimentary but effective approach in an era where germs were as mysterious as unicorns, but enforcing such policies was a logistical nightmare. Without the internet or reliable mail, the only way to spread the word was through town criers or church sermons, and good luck getting people to listen when half of them thought the plague was divine punishment, and the other half were too busy burying their dead to care. It was like trying to herd cats, only with more plague pits and fewer cat memes. Yet somehow, amidst the chaos, rulers managed to maintain a semblance of order. In some cases, they even used the new year to implement new policies or reforms, hoping to distract from the fact that their kingdoms were in shambles. It was a delicate balancing act, like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. And yet, many of them managed to keep the wheels from completely falling off their medieval carts. Of course, not everyone played by the rules. In a world where survival instincts often overruled societal expectations, some communities turned to scapegoating to explain the unexplainable. Blame was heaped on marginalized groups like the Jews, leading to horrific pogroms across Europe. It was a dark chapter in human history, fueled by fear and ignorance, a sobering reminder of how easily the veneer of civilization can crack under pressure. Meanwhile, for those who managed to keep their heads above water, the new year offered a glimmer of hope. It was a chance to reset, even if only symbolically. The promise of a fresh start, however illusory, was a powerful motivator. And while the realities of life, the empty fields, the eerie silence of the towns, the ever-present spectre of death, couldn't be ignored, people found ways to adapt. In the countryside, where communities were smaller and more isolated, the new year might be marked by simpler traditions. Perhaps a communal meal shared among neighbors provided a sense of solidarity. These gatherings, though meager, were rich in camaraderie and storytelling, weaving the fabric of community tighter even as the world threatened to unravel it. In the cities, where the plague had hit hardest, the scene was more desperate. But even here, the human spirit showed remarkable resilience. People turned to music and art as expressions of creativity that defied the grim reality outside their doors. Artists and musicians became chroniclers of their time, capturing both despair and hope in their work. It was a renaissance of sorts, born of necessity rather than luxury, yet nonetheless profound. As the calendar turned, those who survived the year before were faced with the same question: what now? The answer was as varied as the people who pondered it. Some looked to the future with cautious optimism, others with weary skepticism. But regardless of their outlook, one thing was clear: life, as fragile and unpredictable as it was, persisted. So, while the medieval world teetered on the brink of collapse, communities found a peculiar kind of sanctuary in those New Year traditions. It was like hanging a "keep calm and carry on" poster in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, a bit of a stretch, but oddly comforting. Clusters of weary souls, determined to find a flicker of hope in the heart of darkness, gathered together to mark the passage of time. It was less about ringing in the new year with jubilation and more about whispering, "We're still here," into the abyss. And there you have it, a tale of grim realities and stubborn hope, of communities clinging to tradition even as the world crumbled around them. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the determination to find light in the darkest of times. And while the romantic notion of revelry might be a myth, the truth, that people found ways to endure, to connect, to hope, is far more compelling. As we venture further into this historical journey, keep these threads in mind. They weave a tapestry that is both tragic and triumphant, a reminder that even at the edge of collapse, humanity finds a way to carry on. And while the Black Death would eventually loosen its grip, the echoes of its impact would resonate for generations, reshaping societies in ways both subtle and profound. But that, my friends, is a story for another day. As the echoes of the Black Death began to fade, Europe found itself standing on the precipice of transformation. It was like waking up from a nightmare, only to realize the world had changed while you were busy surviving it. The plague had been an uninvited guest that overstayed its welcome, but its departure left a peculiar gift, a canvas for renewal. So, let's roll up our sleeves and dig into the aftermath, where humanity's resilience shines brighter than a knight's armor on a sunny day. In the wake of such monumental devastation, the resilience of the human spirit was nothing short of astounding. Sure, the immediate aftermath was a mess. Imagine trying to tidy up after a party where a third of the guests just disappeared. That was Europe, fields overgrown, cities eerily quiet, and a labor market that was as confused as a medieval compass. But here's the kicker. Out of this chaos emerged a society that wasn't just looking to rebuild, it was ready to reinvent. Let's start with the social fabric, which had been torn apart like a tapestry in the hands of an overzealous cat. The plague didn't just take lives, it shifted the balance of power. With the labor force decimated, surviving workers suddenly found themselves in high demand. Picture medieval peasants realizing they could finally negotiate better wages. It was as if they'd stumbled upon the cheat codes to feudalism, and they weren't shy about using them. This newfound leverage laid the groundwork for future peasant revolts and labor movements, planting the seeds for the eventual decline of feudalism. It was a slow burn, but the match had been lit, and there was no going back. Economically, the post-plague period was a peculiar paradox. Yes, many regions faced economic turmoil, but others found unexpected prosperity. With fewer mouths to feed, food prices dropped, and those who survived often found themselves wealthier. It sounds like a medieval riddle, but it was real. Less people meant more pie for those who were left. The wool industry blossomed, and with it, towns that specialized in textiles thrived. It was like the medieval version of Silicon Valley, only with more sheep and less Wi-Fi. Politically, rulers were forced to adapt or perish. The plague had shown that even the most powerful could be brought low by forces beyond their control. It was a humbling lesson for monarchs who had previously thought themselves untouchable. Those who survived knew they needed to bolster public health measures, not just to save lives, but to maintain their thrones. The idea of quarantine became more than just a desperate measure. It was a strategy that would influence public health for centuries to come. And now, let's tackle the myth of the Black Death as purely a dark, apocalyptic event. It's tempting to view those years as nothing but death and despair, but doing so misses the full picture. The plague was undeniably catastrophic, but it also acted as a catalyst for change. It forced societies to confront their vulnerabilities and to innovate. It was the grim impetus behind the Renaissance, a period of cultural flourishing that followed in its wake. Art, science, and philosophy all took great strides during this time, fueled by a thirst for knowledge and an understanding of life's fragility. The human spirit, it seems, is remarkably stubborn. Despite being battered by one of history's deadliest pandemics, people found ways to celebrate life. New Year's gatherings became a symbol of defiance, a way to say, we're still here, and we're not giving up. It's a sentiment that resonates even today. In the face of adversity, humans have an uncanny ability to find hope, to seek out the light in the darkest of times. It's like we're hardwired to keep going, even when the odds are stacked against us. Fast forward to the present, and you'll see echoes of this resilience everywhere. The spirit of renewal, of starting fresh with each new year, persists. We may not be battling bubonic plague, thankfully, but modern challenges still abound. Yet, like our medieval ancestors, we gather each year to bid farewell to the old and welcome the new. We make resolutions, even if they're about as reliable as a medieval map. We celebrate with fireworks instead of candlelit feasts, but the essence remains the same, a shared determination to see another year through. The Black Death's legacy is a powerful reminder that history is both a teacher and a mirror. It shows us the worst of times, but also the incredible capacity for human resilience. It's a tale of survival against all odds, of societies that emerged from the ashes stronger and more determined. And while the romantic notion of medieval revelry might be largely myth, the truth that people found ways to endure, to connect, and to hope is far more compelling. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's carry these lessons forward. They remind us that even at the edge of collapse, humanity finds a way to carry on. The Black Death may have been a dark chapter, but it also illuminated a path to progress, one paved with innovation and the indomitable human spirit. So here's to the survivors of the past, and to us, the survivors of today. May we face our challenges with the same tenacity and hope that has carried us through the ages. And with that, my friends, we turn the page to a new chapter, one where the lessons of history guide us to a brighter future. Air in Tenochtitlan is alive with a cacophony of sounds, a bustling metropolis teeming with more canals than Venice, and a population pushing 200,000. Picture that. More people than the entire state of Vermont, nestled into a city of floating gardens and marketplaces. You're navigating this vibrant hub of the Aztec Empire in 1519, where the streets are buzzing with traders, warriors, artisans, and of course, priests. Now, before you start imagining a group of sinister figures with obsidian knives at the ready, let's set the record straight about these Aztec priests. These guys weren't just running around like extras in a horror movie. Nope, they were integral cogs in the well-oiled machine that was Aztec society. Sure, they conducted human sacrifices, but there's more to the story. The priests were keepers of religious tradition, astronomers, and community leaders. Think of them as a cross between your local pastor, a university professor, and a rock star. Let's talk about those infamous sacrifices. Yes, they happened. And yes, they were bloody. But the priests weren't just indulging some primal bloodlust. Sacrifices were believed to keep the universe in balance, a necessity in their cosmology. According to Aztec belief, the sun god Huitzilopochtli needed nourishment to rise each day. So, sacrifices were like their version of a cosmic espresso shot to keep the universe ticking. Morbid, sure, but it makes sense if you're trying to prevent the literal end of the world. The economy here thrives on tribute from conquered lands. Imagine a sprawling network of supply chains that would make Amazon jealous. Goods flowed into Tenochtitlan as tribute: cocoa beans, quetzal feathers, jade, and occasionally people. Yes, those unfortunate souls were sometimes destined for the sacrificial altar. But here's the thing. These tributes were not just about appeasing gods. They were a political statement of dominance and control, a not-so-subtle reminder of who ruled the roost. Now you might be asking, why was everyone so into this? Well, the Aztec social structure was a tiered pyramid, pun fully intended, of priests, nobles, warriors, and commoners, all tied together by religion and the economy. The priests were the top dogs in the spiritual hierarchy, wielding significant influence. They interpreted the will of the gods, advised leaders, and were considered essential for the society's prosperity. It wasn't just about spilling blood. It was about maintaining social order and cosmic harmony. Let's bust another myth. These priests weren't just isolated lunatics. They were educated, often from birth, in Karmakak, the priestly schools, where they learned rituals, astronomy, and the all-important art of reading codices, those ancient manuscripts that were the closest thing they had to books. They were intellectuals in robes, balancing the sacred calendar like modern accountants balance checkbooks. So, before you write them off as mere zealots, remember that these priests were vital to the societal and economic engine of Tenochtitlan. They were the ones ensuring that the crops grew, the sun rose, and the people prospered. It's a tough job, but someone had to do it. And in this high-stakes world, the stakes were literally life and death. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the daily life of these enigmatic figures and explore how they managed to keep an empire running on blood, faith, and a fair bit of strategic planning. So, as we continue our jaunt through the Aztec Empire, let's put on our economic analyst hats. No, not those dusty, boring ones. We're talking about the kind you'd wear to navigate an empire that's as rich in tradition as it is in cocoa beans. The Aztecs ran a society where the spiritual and economic worlds were as intertwined as a double helix, each strand essential to the empire's survival. And at the heart of this intricate web were the priests, who weren't just spiritual guides. They were also the CFOs of the spiritual economy. Let's start with the cost of those infamous sacrificial victims. Now, this wasn't a simple case of grab a neighbor and call it a day. No, the process was a bit more sophisticated. Most sacrificial victims were war captives, and capturing them wasn't exactly a leisurely Sunday activity. It required major military campaigns, which in turn required resources. Think of it as an expensive, albeit gruesome, form of international diplomacy. Armies had to be fed, equipped, and motivated. We're talking an economic undertaking that would have made the Aztec accountants, or their equivalent, reach for the nearest abacus. Once captured, these hapless souls became part of the tribute from conquered territories. They were the human capital, so to speak, in a society where human lives were literally considered currency, an idea that, while abhorrent to us now, made perfect sense in their cosmological framework. Remember, these sacrifices were believed to keep the universe from imploding. So, in a twisted way, it was like paying taxes to keep the cosmic roof from caving in. But it wasn't just about the people. The Aztecs needed elaborate temples to perform these rituals, and those didn't come cheap either. The Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, for instance, was a towering symbol of religious and political power. Constructed from limestone and adorned with intricate carvings, it was the Aztec equivalent of a high-stakes Vegas show, minus the sequins, plus a lot more blood. Building these temples required a vast labor force, not to mention the materials, which had to be sourced and transported, often over considerable distances. Imagine the logistical nightmare of dragging massive stones through the jungle without the aid of the wheel or beasts of burden. Talk about a workout. The priests, in their role as spiritual accountants, had to ensure that all these cosmic transactions, human sacrifices, temple constructions, the whole 9 yards, balanced out. They had to keep the spiritual balance sheet in the black, making sure the gods were appeased, the empire stayed prosperous, and the people kept believing. It was a high-wire act with no safety net, where dropping the ball could mean the end of the world, quite literally. Now, let's reflect on some modern parallels, because why not make the past uncomfortably relevant? Imagine a CEO who has to balance the books, manage public relations, and keep the company from imploding, all while maintaining the favor of some very demanding stakeholders. Replace stakeholders with gods and company with universe, and you're starting to get the picture. It's a reminder that while the stakes might have been different, the fundamental challenge of balancing resources and expectations is one that transcends time. And while we're at it, let's debunk another myth, the idea that these priests were merely power-hungry zealots. Sure, they wielded considerable influence, but they also bore a heavy responsibility. The Aztec priests didn't just sit on golden thrones, reveling in their power. They were constantly engaged in the hard work of maintaining cosmic and earthly order. Their power came with the kind of pressure that would make the average modern-day executive break out in a cold sweat. So, as you wander through the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan in your mind, smelling the exotic spices and hearing the clamor of trade, remember that behind this vibrant facade was a complex, high-stakes economic machine. The priests were the ones keeping it all running smoothly, their rituals ensuring the sun rose each day and the empire flourished. They were the unseen hands balancing an empire on the edge of a ritual knife, ensuring that, for another day, the world would keep spinning. Stay tuned as we unravel more of this ancient world, where each day was a dance with destiny, and the next sacrifice was just around the corner. Now, let's take a detour from the bustling streets of Tenochtitlan and dive into the high-stakes world of Aztec politics. Enter Moctezuma Roman II, the emperor who wasn't just playing the political game, he was rewriting the rulebook. If you think of him as just another emperor with a penchant for feathered headdresses, you're missing the grand spectacle. Moctezuma Roman II knew the art of wielding religion like a master chess player, and boy, did he have a knack for it. Picture this. The year is 1502, and Moctezuma's coronation is more than just a fancy ceremony. It's a calculated move to secure his position at the top of the Aztec food chain. He understood that to rule an empire, you didn't just need a strong army, you needed the gods on your side. And who better to ensure divine favor than the priests? These guys were the original spin doctors, crafting narratives that would make even the savviest PR firms green with envy. Moctezuma's relationship with the priests was a symbiotic dance. He needed their religious clout to legitimize his rule, while they needed his political power to maintain their influence. Together, they formed an unholy alliance that held the empire together. The priests acted as Moctezuma's advisors, whispering divine guidance that conveniently aligned with his political ambitions. And let's face it, when your empire spans over 80,000 square miles, covering parts of what we now know as central and southern Mexico, having the guards as your campaign managers isn't a bad strategy. But Moctezuma didn't stop there. He took the concept of divine right to a whole new level, presenting himself as a semi-divine figure, a demigod walking among mortals. The people bought it, hook, line, and sinker, partly because the priests were there, nodding along and reinforcing the narrative. It was the ultimate power move. Convince the masses that your rule is ordained by the gods, and suddenly any dissent starts to look a lot like blasphemy. In a way, Moctezuma was the Steve Jobs of his time, revolutionizing the way leadership was perceived. Instead of a turtleneck and jeans, he had the feathered cloak and obsidian crown, but the principle was the same. Create a brand so powerful that it becomes synonymous with the divine. And just like that, Moctezuma was more than an emperor. He was the living embodiment of the Aztec cosmos. Now, let's debunk a myth that's been floating around like a feather in the breeze. Moctezuma is often portrayed as a passive ruler, a deer caught in the headlights of the oncoming Spanish conquest. The reality, he was anything but passive. Moctezuma was a strategic thinker, using religion as a tool to consolidate power and expand the empire's reach. He orchestrated religious festivals that were as much about demonstrating political might as they were about appeasing the gods. These festivals were spectacles of grandeur, with thousands of participants and more pomp than a royal wedding. And the priests, they were the conductors of this elaborate symphony, ensuring each note was hit just right. They advised Moctezuma on which gods needed extra attention, which rituals would best demonstrate his divine favor, and which alliances would keep the empire strong. Think of them as the ultimate crisis management team, spinning every event to maintain the emperor's image and the empire's stability. As we peel back the layers of this political onion, it becomes clear that the Aztec priests were more than just spiritual guides. They were key players in the empire's power dynamics. They wielded influence like a finely honed obsidian blade, cutting through the noise to ensure their voices were heard. In today's terms, they were the behind-the-scenes puppeteers, pulling the strings to keep the show running smoothly. And let's not forget the economic implications of this religious politico complex. The priests weren't just advisors, they were economic strategists, ensuring that the empire's wealth flowed in the right direction. The tributes that poured into Tenochtitlan weren't just offerings to the gods. They were a testament to Moctezuma's political prowess and the priests' influence. They acted as stewards of this wealth, managing resources and ensuring that the empire's coffers were always full. Remember, in a world where cocoa beans were currency and jade was the gold standard, keeping the economy afloat was no small feat. So, as we wrap our heads around the political chess game of the Aztec Empire, it's clear that the priests were the kingmakers, the strategists who ensured that Moctezuma's rule was as unshakable as the temples they built. They were the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your perspective, of an empire that thrived on the delicate balance of power, faith, and fear. As we continue our journey through this vibrant world, keep in mind that the story of the Aztec priests is far from over. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more secrets to reveal. So, hang tight, because the next chapter in this saga is just around the corner, and it's bound to be as thrilling as a jaguar hunt at dawn. As we delve further into the Aztec saga, it's time to dissect the myths that have clung to these priests like barnacles on a ship's hull. First up, let's talk about those Spanish conquistadors, our original purveyors of fake news. These guys, led by Hernán Cortés, were the ultimate unreliable narrators. Imagine a tabloid journalist with a penchant for embellishment, and you've got their number. The Spanish accounts of Aztec priests often read like a horror novel written by someone with a flair for the dramatic. According to these tales, the priests were bloodthirsty fanatics, practically swimming in rivers of sacrificial gore. Now, before you start imagining them as extras in a Quentin Tarantino film, let's sift through these stories and see what holds water. The Florentine Codex, compiled by the Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagun, is one of the most comprehensive sources on Aztec culture. It's like the ultimate behind-the-scenes documentary of the Aztec world, though not without its biases. What it tells us is that the priests were certainly involved in sacrifice, but they were far from the sadistic caricatures painted by the conquistadors. They were performing rituals that were deeply embedded in their society's beliefs, not just indulging in some macabre pastime. Why did these myths persist, you ask? Well, consider the context. The Spanish were newcomers in a strange land, and like any good imperialist, they needed to justify their conquest. Painting the Aztecs as barbaric heathens made it a lot easier to sell the whole civilizing mission back home. It's like they were the original spin doctors, and boy, were they spinning fast. Fast forward a few centuries, and Hollywood picked up the baton, running with these tales like Usain Bolt on a sugar high. Movies and TV have often portrayed Aztec priests as exotic villains, complete with menacing headdresses and ominous chants. It's all very Indiana Jones, but let's break it down. These portrayals are about as historically accurate as a unicorn at a rodeo. The appeal, however, is undeniable. There's something irresistible about the exotic and the mysterious, and Hollywood loves a good villain. But let's get back to the facts. The Florentine Codex and other primary sources reveal a much more nuanced picture. The rituals were complex, the motivations rooted in a cosmology that saw the universe as a delicate balance of forces. The priests were the guardians of this balance, tasked with ensuring that the cosmic scales didn't tip into chaos. The persistence of these myths is a testament to the power of narrative. It's like a game of historical telephone, where the story gets more distorted with each retelling. Cultural misunderstanding played a huge role here. The conquistadors, steeped in their own religious framework, saw the Aztec practices as alien and terrifying. It's a classic case of projecting one's fears onto the unknown. And then there's the propaganda angle. The Spanish crown had a vested interest in portraying the Aztecs as brutal savages. It justified their actions and painted them as saviors, bringing the light of Christianity to the benighted masses. This narrative was so effective that it seeped into the collective consciousness, sticking around like a bad case of historical indigestion. So how do we separate fact from fiction? By diving into the details. The Aztec priests were more than the sum of their rituals. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and philosophers, seeking to understand the universe through their own lens. They played a pivotal role in the society, not as tyrants, but as teachers and guides. Let's talk numbers. The Aztec calendar, for instance, was a marvel of precision, requiring a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. The priests were the keepers of this knowledge, ensuring that rituals were conducted at the right time to appease the gods. This wasn't just superstition. It was a sophisticated system that governed every aspect of life, from agriculture to politics. In economic terms, the priests were like the central bankers of the Aztec world. They managed the flow of tribute and resources, ensuring that the empire's wealth was distributed in a way that maintained stability. This wasn't just about appeasing deities. It was about keeping the wheels of empire turning smoothly. The myth of the bloodthirsty priest is a compelling story, but it oversimplifies a complex reality. The truth is far more interesting. A society that thrived on a blend of spirituality, economics, and politics, with the priests at the heart of it all. They were the ones who understood the stakes, both cosmic and earthly, and balanced them with a skill that would make any modern economist proud. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Aztec history, remember that the real story is always more fascinating than the fiction. So, the next time you see a Hollywood trope about Aztec priests, take it with a grain of salt, and maybe a shot of cosmic espresso. We've got more myths to bust and more truths to tell, so stay tuned for the next chapter in our deep dive into the ancient world. The curtain's only just rising on this epic saga, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And as the curtain rises on the final act of our Aztec historical saga, let's step back from the jungle of myths and take a look at the legacy these ancient rituals left behind. The Aztecs, with their elaborate ceremonies and cosmic coffee breaks, managed to carve out a niche in history that's as enduring as the pyramids they built. Yet, for all the blood and feathers, there's more to their story than meets the eye. Today, we find ourselves fascinated by the Aztecs, not just because they had a penchant for dramatic rituals, but because they left us with a puzzle, a Rubik's Cube of history, if you will. How did a society so deeply rooted in sacrifice and celestial balance leave a legacy that still captivates us? Well, buckle up, because we're going to dive into this conundrum with all the fervor of an Aztec priest on a festival day. First off, let's talk about how these rituals resonate with us today. Modern culture has a knack for romanticizing the past, and the Aztecs are no exception. There's something undeniably alluring about a society that saw the world as a cosmic stage, with each ritual a performance for the gods. It's the ultimate drama, complete with high stakes and a celestial audience. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good drama? But beyond the romance is a harsh reality. The Aztec rituals were about survival in a world that felt as unpredictable as a cat on a hot tin roof. They lived in constant awareness that the universe's balance was as delicate as a house of cards. These rituals, bloody as they were attempts to control the uncontrollable, to inject a bit of order into chaos. It's a theme that still resonates today, albeit in less gory ways. Think about it. We might not be sacrificing captives to sun gods anymore, but we still perform our own rituals to make sense of the world. From New Year's resolutions to daily routines, we seek patterns that provide comfort, continuity, and a semblance of control. It's human nature to look for meaning in the mundane. Just ask anyone who's ever searched for their horoscope after a bad day. Now let's tackle the elephant in the room, human sacrifice. Yes, the Aztecs did it, and yes, it was brutal, but let's not oversimplify. For them, it was about maintaining cosmic order, a kind of spiritual insurance policy. We might find it grotesque, but in their worldview it was essential. It was the price of keeping the celestial dance going, the ultimate pay-to-play scenario. The Aztec priests, with their elaborate rituals and deep understanding of the stars, were akin to the world's first cosmic philosophers. They sought to understand the universe, to find their place within it, and to ensure their society's survival. In a way, they were the original existentialists, grappling with the big questions in a world where the stakes were as high as the Templo Mayor. And let's not forget the economic angle. The Aztec rituals were as much about resource management as they were about spirituality. The priests were the unsung accountants of the empire, ensuring that the flow of tribute and resources kept the empire's coffers brimming. In a society where cocoa beans were currency and jade was a status symbol, maintaining economic stability was a ritual in itself. Fast forward to today, and we still see echoes of Aztec influence in modern culture. From the architectural wonders of Mexico City, built on the very foundations of Tenochtitlan, to the global fascination with Mesoamerican art and mythology, the Aztecs left an indelible mark. Their rituals, once shrouded in mystery and fear, are now subjects of academic study and cultural appreciation. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Aztecs is their testament to the human spirit's resilience. In a world where life was fleeting and the universe capricious, they found ways to create meaning, to build a society that was as complex and vibrant as the jungle that surrounded them. It's a reminder that the search for meaning is as old as humanity itself, a quest that transcends time and culture. So, as we conclude our journey through the fascinating world of Aztec rituals, let's raise a metaphorical glass to their legacy. They were a people who dared to dance with the divine, to seek understanding in a cosmos that seemed indifferent. Their story is one of survival, innovation, and the unyielding human desire to find order in chaos. And there you have it, a deep dive into the world of Aztec rituals, where blood met belief and the cosmic curtain never truly fell. As we step back from the ancient stage, take a moment to reflect on the intricate tapestry of history we've unraveled. Because, in the end, understanding the past is more than an academic exercise. It's a way to understand ourselves, to see how far we've come, and to ponder the mysteries that still lie ahead. In the grand theater of history, the Aztecs played their part with flair and fervor, leaving behind a legacy that's as complex as the patterns they saw in the stars. And as we continue our own journey through the cosmos, let's carry their story with us, a reminder of the power of belief, the intricacies of human nature, and the enduring quest for meaning in a world that never stops spinning. If you ever thought Victorian England was like a Charles Dickens novel, where snowflakes fall gently on cobblestone streets and everyone ends up singing around a Christmas tree, you're only half right, and the wrong half at that. Because lurking behind those festive scenes were the Victorian workhouses, where the spirit of Christmas was less about roasting chestnuts and more about, well, trying not to freeze your toes off. Let's dive into the gritty world of these infamous institutions, where the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 delivered more of a lump of coal than a season of goodwill. So, what's the deal with this Poor Law Amendment Act, you ask? Think of it as the Victorian government's awkward attempt at resolving poverty by making it so unpleasant that people would do anything to avoid it. Passed in 1834, this piece of legislation was the brainchild of a bunch of lawmakers who believed that poverty was a character flaw rather than an economic issue. Their solution: workhouses. These were supposed to be places of refuge for the destitute, but they were designed more like a Victorian version of Survivor, minus the tropical beaches and million-dollar prize. The workhouse system was meant to deter the so-called able-bodied poor from relying on public assistance. The logic was simple: make the conditions inside the workhouse so harsh that it was a last resort. If you were in a workhouse, you were either too sick, too old, or too young to fend for yourself. And if you weren't any of those, well, you were in for a world of misery meant to inspire you to find any possible way to survive outside its walls. Now, let's talk about what these workhouses were really like. Imagine a place so drab and soul-crushing that even the Grim Reaper would think twice before hanging out there. The architecture alone was a study in how to make a building as unwelcoming as possible. These institutions were often built with high, imposing walls and barred windows, giving them the look of a prison rather than a place of refuge. And honestly, calling them a refuge is like calling a haunted house a cozy retreat. Inside, the conditions were dire. We're talking about overcrowded dormitories, meager rations, and work that was both physically exhausting and mind-numbingly tedious. If you were lucky, you might get to pick oakum, unraveling old ropes, or break stones. Unlucky, you might be stuck in a laundry room that doubled as a sauna in summer and a freezer in winter. The work was designed to be as unappealing as possible, not just to deter dependency, but to instill the kind of moral fiber that would have made a Victorian matron swoon with pride. But let's not forget about Christmas, that magical time of year when everyone gets to gather around the fire and sing carols about goodwill to all men. Except, in the workhouses, the fire was more of a smouldering coal heap, and goodwill was in short supply. The seasonal cheer was often limited to a slightly improved meal and maybe, if you were really fortunate, a small token or treat. A far cry from the lavish feasts and merriment we associate with the holiday season today. The grim reality of workhouses quickly became a symbol of societal failure. Far from offering compassion, they highlighted the stark divide between the wealthy elite and the struggling masses. It was a tale of two cities, quite literally, with the affluent enjoying the comforts of their drawing rooms while the poor navigated the treacherous landscape of the workhouse system. This dichotomy wasn't lost on the era's social critics, including our pal Charles Dickens, who used his novels to spotlight these injustices. Dickens wasn't just spinning yarns about ghosts of Christmas past for fun. His works served as a biting commentary on the social ills of his time, with the workhouse system often taking center stage. In Oliver Twist, for example, the young orphan's plea for more gruel wasn't just a plot point. It was a rallying cry against the dehumanizing conditions many faced. Dickens's ability to weave these social critiques into his stories helped spark public outcry and eventually led to reforms. Yet, despite the grimness, the workhouses were part of a broader narrative about industrialization and social change. England was in the throes of the Industrial Revolution, a time when steam engines were the new rock stars and factories were popping up like mushrooms. This shift brought prosperity for some, but left others in the dust, particularly those who were displaced from rural areas and found themselves adrift in the city. The workhouse system, in its twisted way, was a reflection of these economic upheavals. It was an attempt to manage the fallout of rapid urbanization and the resulting poverty. Unfortunately, it often did so at the expense of human dignity. While the wealthy debated the merits of economic theories in their parlors, the poor were caught in a cycle of despair, with the workhouse as both a symptom and a cause of their plight. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine the Victorian era as a time of elegance and innovation. But the reality was far more complex, with the workhouses serving as a stark reminder of the era's darker side. They were places where the veneer of progress cracked, revealing the harsh economic realities beneath. As we peel back the layers of this history, it's important to remember that the workhouses, as grim as they were, played a role in shaping modern social welfare systems. The public outcry they generated eventually led to reforms and a more compassionate approach to poverty. While the workhouses themselves were phased out, their legacy lives on in the ongoing debates about how best to support those in need. So, as we continue to explore the world of Victorian workhouses and the poverty behind the carols, let's keep in mind that history is never as simple as it seems. It's a tapestry of triumphs and failures, of progress and setback, a story that continues to unfold in new and unexpected ways. And speaking of the tapestry of history, let's pull back the curtain a bit further on those Victorian workhouses to reveal the not-so-jolly Christmas cheer, or lack thereof. You see, while the upper crust was busy decking the halls with boughs of holly, workhouse residents were lucky if they even got a sprig of parsley with their gruel. Forget visions of sugar plums. These folks were dreaming of something more substantial, like bread or maybe a slice of meat, if they were feeling particularly optimistic. Now, before we dive deeper, let's get one thing straight. Victorian Christmas wasn't exactly the Hallmark movie we often imagine today. Sure, there were fancy balls and extravagant feasts in the homes of the wealthy, but even then, the holiday's commercial explosion was just beginning to take shape. By the mid-19th century, thanks to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, who was basically the 19th century's biggest Christmas influencer, the tree decorating, card sending, and gift-giving traditions were gaining traction. But for the workhouse crowd, these festive trappings were as elusive as Bigfoot at a shoe sale. In the workhouses, Christmas was more like a slightly spruced-up Tuesday. The best-case scenario might involve a modest feast, think a smidge more food than usual, not the turkey and stuffing bonanza you might be picturing. And let's be clear, a smidge more food is relative when your baseline is starvation levels. The Board of Guardians, those lovely folks in charge of workhouse operations, might authorize an extra ounce or two of meat or a rare treat like pudding. But this wasn't your great-grandma's pudding recipe. We're talking a dense, suet-laden concoction that was more survival ration than dessert. And speaking of survival, let's not gloss over the economic chasm separating the haves from the have-nots. While the rich were toasting with champagne, the workhouse residents were lucky if they got a slightly less watered-down version of their daily gruel. The social mindset of the time saw poverty as a moral failing, a notion that conveniently absolved the wealthy from any responsibility for systemic inequality. It was a classic case of blame the victim economics that would make even a modern cynic wince. So, while the upper classes were enjoying their plum puddings and figgy treats, workhouses were a stark reminder of the era's harsh realities. Christmas decorations, only if you count the frosty windows and drafty halls as ambience. Carols, sure, if you mean the echo of shuffling feet and the occasional cough breaking the silence. The workhouse Christmas was more about endurance than enjoyment, a grim footnote to the festive chapters being penned in the lavish homes of the elite. It's not that the Victorian philanthropists didn't try to spread some cheer. Occasionally, well-meaning benefactors would swoop in with gifts or organize special events. But these were the exception, not the rule. And often, the gifts were as practical as they were uninspiring, warm clothing or a pair of shoes rather than toys or sweets. While these gestures were certainly appreciated, they were a band-aid on a bullet wound, offering temporary relief but no long-term solutions. The workhouses, in their twisted Dickensian way, mirrored the upheaval of the Industrial Revolution. As factories churned out goods and railways crisscrossed the landscape, Britain's economy was booming for some, but imploding for others. The rural poor, displaced by mechanization and agricultural shifts, often ended up in urban centers with little more than hope and a prayer. And when that hope ran dry, the workhouse loomed as an inevitable destination. And so, the workhouse Christmas became a symbol of broader societal failures. It highlighted the deep-seated inequalities and the cruel irony of a season meant for generosity and joy being reduced to mere survival for many. This wasn't lost on social reformers of the time, who decried the conditions and pushed for change. Yet change was slow, and for many, the workhouse remained a grim reality for decades. But enough of the doom and gloom, let's not forget the gallows humor that often arises in the bleakest of situations. Victorians, for all their stiff upper lips and stoic demeanor, could be surprisingly cheeky. There were stories of workhouse inmates managing to carve out small moments of levity, whether through makeshift games or shared laughter. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, people find ways to kindle a spark of joy. Yet, The Workhouse Christmas still serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring systemic inequality. It underscores the importance of addressing poverty with empathy and understanding rather than judgment and disdain. And while we've come a long way since those Dickensian days, the echoes of the past still resonate, reminding us that the fight for social justice is far from over. As we ponder the Workhouse Christmas, let's remember that history is more than just dates and events. It's a reflection of human nature, with all its complexities and contradictions. And as we move forward, it's crucial to learn from the past to build a more equitable future. Whether it's through policy changes, community support, or simply lending a helping hand, the spirit of Christmas, true Christmas, is about lifting each other up, not looking the other way. So, as we continue our exploration of the Victorian workhouses, keep in mind that every story has layers. The myths, the realities, and the lessons all weave together to create a narrative that's as relevant today as it was over a century ago. And while we may not have all the answers, the journey of discovery is what makes history not just a subject to study, but a story to live and learn from. And just as we're peeling back the tinsel from the Victorian workhouses, let's stroll into the cultural spotlight where the media and literary giants of the day were busy painting their own pictures of these institutions. If you think the media circus is a modern invention, think again. The Victorian era was a hotbed of sensationalism and sentimentality, with newspapers and novels whipping up public sentiment faster than you can say, breaking news. Let's start with Charles Dickens, the man who was as influential in shaping public opinion as a viral tweet. Dickens was no stranger to the gritty realities of the workhouse system. Born in 1812, he had first-hand experience with the harshness of poverty when his father was jailed for debt, and young Charles was sent to work in a blacking factory. This brush with destitution left a scar that would later fuel his fiery indictments of societal neglect. Enter A Christmas Carol, Dickens's 1843 novella that became an instant classic, embedding phrases like bar, humbug, into the lexicon. But this wasn't just a ghostly tale meant to spook readers into holiday generosity. It was a scathing critique of a society that turned a blind eye to the suffering of the poor. Ebenezer Scrooge, with his miserly ways and disdain for the needy, was a caricature of the real-life industrialists who balked at the idea of charity, and the Cratchit family's meager Christmas feast, a poignant reflection of the scant celebratory fare that workhouse inmates could only dream of. Dickens's portrayal of the workhouse in Oliver Twist, published in 1837, was equally brutal. The infamous scene where Oliver dares to ask for more is etched into the collective consciousness. It wasn't just about hunger. It was a jab at the dehumanizing system that treated people like machinery, toiling away with little hope of escape. Through his vivid storytelling, Dickens held up a mirror to Victorian society, forcing the public to confront the ugly truths lurking beneath their polished veneers. But Dickens wasn't alone in this literary crusade. Other writers and journalists were also wielding their pens like weapons, slicing through the rhetoric to expose the harsh realities of workhouse life. Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor, published in the 1850, was an eye-opening series of articles that documented the lives of the city's most destitute. Mayhew was a sort of proto-investigative journalist, pounding the pavement and interviewing everyone from costermongers to chimney sweeps. His work shed light on the systemic issues contributing to poverty, painting a picture of a city where survival was a daily struggle. And let's not forget the power of the press. Victorian newspapers were the social media of their day, sensationalizing stories to sell copies while occasionally sparking outrage and reform. The Times and the Morning Chronicle were among those that reported on workhouse conditions, with exposés that prompted public outcry and sometimes governmental action. These publications held sway over public opinion, acting as both watchdogs and agitators for change. Yet, the portrayal of workhouses wasn't all doom and gloom. Some narratives romanticized the institutions, portraying them as benevolent sanctuaries, providing shelter and sustenance. This rose-tinted view was often perpetuated by those in power, eager to justify the existence of such establishments. The Poor Law Commissioners, for example, were keen to emphasize the reformative nature of workhouses, glossing over the grim daily realities faced by their inmates. This tension between romanticized ideals and brutal truths fueled ongoing debates about poverty and responsibility. Was it the individual's fault for falling into destitution, or was it a societal failure? The workhouse system, with its punitive approach, leaned heavily towards the former, conveniently placing the blame on the poor themselves. The Victorian era's fascination with poverty and charity was a complex tapestry woven with threads of sympathy, disdain, and moral superiority. While some championed reform and empathy, others clung to the notion that poverty was deserved, a natural consequence of laziness or vice. This dichotomy played out in literature and media, where the struggle between compassion and condemnation was as palpable as a Dickensian fog. The impact of these narratives was profound. Dickens and his contemporaries didn't just entertain, they educated and incited action. Their works acted as catalysts for change, stirring the public conscience and prompting discussions that would eventually lead to policy shifts. The 1847 Poor Law Amendment Act, for instance, introduced measures aimed at improving workhouse conditions, albeit slowly and unevenly. Yet, for all the progress, the workhouse system remained a contentious symbol of Victorian society's failings. It highlighted the chasm between the wealthy and the poor, a divide that literature and journalism sought to bridge, often with mixed results. The stories told by Dickens and others were both reflections and critiques of their time, capturing the era's complexities in a way that resonated deeply with readers then and now. As we assess the role of literature and media in shaping public perception, it's clear that the power of storytelling was, and remains, immense. Dickens's tales, with their blend of social critique and compelling narratives, continue to influence how we view poverty and charity. They remind us that behind every statistic is a human story, a truth that transcends time and place. So, as we prepare to delve further into the Victorian workhouses, let's remember that history is a living, breathing entity, shaped by those who dare to question the status quo. The workhouse narratives of yore are not just relics of the past. They're echoes of ongoing societal debates, urging us to look beyond the surface and engage with the deeper issues at play. Stay tuned, because this exploration is far from over. There's more to unravel in the tangled web of Victorian workhouses, and as we continue, we'll uncover the layers of influence, reform, and resistance that defined an era and continue to inform our world today. As we continue peeling back the layers of this Victorian onion, let's take a look at those who wielded the metaphorical knives to slice through the workhouse system's red tape. Now, if you think bureaucracy is a modern invention designed to test your patience, imagine navigating the Victorian version, where reform was slower than a snail on tranquilizers. But fear not, for there were those who dared to challenge the status quo, armed with nothing more than a passion for change, and sometimes a flair for the dramatic. Enter the social reformers, the unsung heroes who weren't content to sit idly by while the poor were dehumanized in the name of frugality. One such figure was the formidable Florence Nightingale. Yes, the lady with the lamp wasn't just about tending to wounded soldiers. She was also a staunch advocate for improving the conditions of workhouses. Nightingale's 1863 report on workhouse infirmaries was a blistering critique, highlighting the dire need for proper medical care. Picture this: Nightingale, with her no-nonsense attitude, tearing into the inefficiencies of the system like a Victorian Gordon Ramsay in a kitchen full of soggy soufflés. And let's not forget Anthony Ashley Cooper, better known as the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury. If there was a champion for the downtrodden, Shaftesbury was it. This guy was like the Batman of social reform, fighting for children's rights and pushing for legislation to improve workhouse conditions. His 1844 campaign for the 10 Hours Act, aimed at reducing working hours for women and children, showed that he was all about that work-life balance before it was trendy. But reform wasn't just a one-person show. Organizations like the Charity Organization Society, CAS, founded in 1869, aimed to coordinate efforts and provide more structured assistance. While they weren't exactly handing out gold stars for compassion, COS had a reputation for being a tad judgmental. They did push for systematic solutions to poverty, advocating for workhouse improvements as part of a broader strategy. Now, Christmas, that season of goodwill and questionable fruitcakes sometimes served as a spotlight on the plight of workhouse inmates. Picture Victorian tabloids, all aglow with stories of holiday cheer, suddenly splashing headlines about the grim reality behind workhouse walls. Christmas charity drives became a thing, with the public urged to donate to those less fortunate. It was a time when the wealthy were gently reminded that perhaps their holiday feast could spare a few crumbs for those in need. But let's not get too carried away with the warm fuzzies. While some genuinely embraced the spirit of giving, others treated it as a mere seasonal obligation, akin to wearing an ugly sweater because grandma knitted it. Yet, this increased attention during the holidays did spur some legislative changes. For instance, the 1867 Metropolitan Poor Act aimed to provide more specialized care for the sick poor, a move partly fueled by public awareness and outrage. Speaking of outrage, the 1905 Unemployed Workmen Act sought to address the broader issues of unemployment, with workhouses playing a pivotal role in relief efforts. This act was a step in the right direction, but like a new pair of shoes, it took some breaking in. Implementation was slow, and many workhouses continued to struggle with overcrowding and inadequate resources. Reformers, like investigative journalists of their day, used every tool at their disposal to shine a light on the workhouse conditions. Pamphlets, speeches, and public rallies were their weapons of choice, slicing through ignorance like a hot knife through butter. They understood that change required more than just good intentions. It needed public support and political will. Yet, even with these efforts, change was often incremental. The wheels of reform turned at a glacial pace, hindered by entrenched social attitudes and political resistance. The notion that poverty was a personal failing rather than a societal issue was deeply ingrained, making it difficult to shift perspectives. And while we're on the subject of perspective, let's not forget the role of Queen Victoria herself. Though not a reformer in the trench sense, her endorsement of Christmas traditions helped popularize the idea of charity. Her support for seasonal giving encouraged the upper crust to open their purses, even if just for a moment, to those less fortunate. As we navigate these choppy waters of reform and resistance, it's clear that the story of Victorian workhouses is one of both struggle and perseverance. It's a tale of individuals and institutions clashing over the moral and practical implications of poverty. And while the workhouses are no longer the grim specters they once were, their legacy lingers in the debates about social welfare and inequality that continue to this day. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into this historical narrative, let's keep our eyes peeled for the unexpected twists and turns that define the journey of reform. The past may be a foreign country, but its echoes still resonate, reminding us that the fight for justice and compassion is a timeless endeavor. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting. As we sail into the final act of our Victorian workhouse saga, let's take a step back and consider the legacy these institutions left behind, a legacy as complex as a Victorian lace doily, if considerably less decorative. The workhouses were the grandfathers of modern welfare systems, albeit the kind of grandfathers who tell you to toughen up while handing you a slice of stale bread. Their existence and eventual reform sparked a dialogue that would shape how societies thought about poverty, charity, and social responsibility for generations to come. First, let's talk numbers. By the late 19th century, there were over 600 workhouses across England and Wales, housing a population that fluctuated around 200,000 souls. That's a small city's worth of people enduring conditions that would make a Dickens novel look like a bedtime story. The sheer scale of the workhouse system highlighted the scope of poverty, an uncomfortable truth that couldn't be ignored forever. The public outcry and journalistic exposés eventually forced the government to rethink its approach to poverty, leading to incremental but significant changes. One of the key reforms came in the early 20th century with the introduction of the Old Age Pensions Act in 1908. This act marked a seismic shift in how society viewed its responsibility toward the elderly, allowing them to retire without the ignominy of a workhouse bed as their only safety net. It was a move that recognized poverty as a societal failure rather than a personal one, a concept that was radical at the time. And let's not forget the National Insurance Act of 1911, which laid the groundwork for unemployment and health benefits, precursor to the modern welfare state. These reforms were like the first bricks laid in the foundation of a system meant to catch people before they fell into destitution. But oh, those myths. The romantic notion of the workhouse as a place of last resort, a benevolent institution providing shelter and sustenance, was far from reality. Yet this myth persists, fueled by nostalgia for a time when everyone knew their place, and poverty was supposedly kept behind closed doors. The truth was far more brutal, with overcrowding, inadequate food, and a lack of medical care. And let's not even get started on the social stigma. Being an inmate was a label that clung to you like a Victorian corset, squeezing the life out of any chance for upward mobility. Christmas, too, has its share of myths when it comes to the workhouse. The image of a Dickensian Christmas with snow-dusted streets and carolers belting out tunes in perfect harmony doesn't hold up when you look at the realities. For many in the workhouses, Christmas was a day like any other, marked only by a slight improvement in rations and perhaps a rare treat. But this stark reality didn't stop the romanticization of the holiday season. The idea of Christmas as a time of charity and goodwill became a societal ideal, even if the execution was more humbug than God bless us, everyone. The Victorian workhouses serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring systemic inequality. They remind us of the deep-seated societal issues that can't be fixed with a quick dose of charity. The workhouse system was a band-aid on a gaping wound, an attempt to manage poverty without addressing its root causes. It's a bit like trying to cure a toothache with a soothing cup of tea, comforting in the short term, but utterly ineffective in the long run. And yet, the legacy of these institutions isn't all doom and gloom. The public outcry they generated led to tangible changes, pushing society toward a more compassionate and systematic approach to welfare. They forced a reckoning with the uncomfortable reality that poverty is not a choice, but often a consequence of systemic failures. The discussions they sparked continue to resonate today, as debates about social welfare and economic inequality remain as relevant as ever. In a way, the workhouses were the crucible in which modern social policy was forged. They were a grim reminder that a society is only as strong as its most vulnerable members. The lessons learned from their failures have informed countless reforms and policies, shaping the welfare systems we know today. These systems, while far from perfect, represent a commitment to ensuring that no one falls through the cracks, a commitment born out of the hard-learned lessons of the past. So, as we wrap up our journey through the Victorian workhouses, let's take a moment to reflect on the broader narrative. This story is more than just a historical footnote. It's a reminder that the fight for social justice and equality is ongoing. The workhouses may be gone, but their legacy lives on in the policies and attitudes that continue to evolve. They serve as a stark reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a living, breathing entity that shapes our present and future. As we look back on the myths and realities of the workhouse Christmas, let's carry forward the lessons learned. Lessons about compassion, empathy, and the importance of a safety net for all. In doing so, we honor the struggles of those who endured the harsh conditions of the workhouses, ensuring that their story serves as a catalyst for change rather than a relic of the past. Because in the end, history isn't just about where we've been, it's about where we're going. And that, dear friends, is a journey worth taking. If you think Christmas markets are all about twinkling lights, mulled wine, and quaint wooden stalls, let's take a reality check back to their origins in medieval Europe. Forget the Instagram-ready scenes. We're talking about survival, folks. Long before Instagram influencers decided that Christmas markets were the ultimate backdrop, they were the bustling, somewhat chaotic heart of medieval towns like Vienna and Munich. Picture it, the late Middle Ages, a time when the Black Death was still making occasional guest appearances, and winter is coming wasn't just a catchy phrase from a TV show, but a genuine seasonal threat. Back in the day, the December fairs were more about stocking up on essentials than sipping overpriced hot beverages. These markets were the medieval version of a Costco run, but with more mud and fewer samples. Townsfolk flocked to buy everything they'd need to survive the harsh winter months. Think dried meats, grains, woolen garments, and perhaps the medieval equivalent of toilet paper, whatever that was. Retail therapy, more like retail necessity. The first recorded Christmas market, or Christkindlmarkt, dates back to 1298 in Vienna. Imagine a city charter not for a jolly festive gathering, but for a bustling hub of trade and barter. This was an economic lifeline for many, not a quaint holiday tradition. The market wasn't just a place to buy goods. It was a vibrant center of trade where merchants haggled over prices and bartered goods like their lives depended on it. Because sometimes they did. Now, let's talk regulations. Ah, the joy of medieval bureaucracy. Market charters were like the medieval equivalent of a business license, only with more parchment and fewer PDFs. These charters didn't just pop out of nowhere. The towns had to apply for them, often petitioning the local lord or ruler to grant official recognition. And once they got the go-ahead, there were strict rules to follow. Merchants had to adhere to regulations about who could sell what and where. It was like an early form of zoning laws, ensuring that the blacksmith didn't suddenly decide to start selling spiced wine next to the pig farmer. The economic realities of these markets were less about festive cheer and more about ensuring the town didn't starve by February. You couldn't just throw up a stall and start selling your wares. Oh no, my friend. Space in these markets was prime real estate, and it often cost a pretty penny, or rather, a pretty pfennig. Merchants would travel from afar, enduring treacherous roads and the occasional highwayman to get a piece of the action. And let's not forget the smells. Ah, medieval market aroma, a delightful mix of smoked meats, fresh produce, and the not-so-subtle waft of human and animal odors. Romantic, right? The chaos of the market was a sensory overload in every sense. Picture a cacophony of shouting vendors, clattering horse hooves, and the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It was less silent night and more jingle all the way on full blast. But amidst the mess, there was a certain magic. The market was a social hotspot, a place to catch up on the latest town gossip, or perhaps share a tankard of ale with a fellow weary traveler. It was here that the seeds of what we now view as festive cheer were sown, albeit in a much grittier form. So, the next time you wander through a modern Christmas market, spare a thought for its origins. Sure, it looks like a scene from a Hallmark movie now, but back in medieval times, it was more like the thrilling climax of a medieval survival drama. The markets were a testament to human resilience, a place where people came together not just to celebrate the upcoming holiday, but to ensure they all made it through the winter alive. But as we march into the 16th and 17th centuries, our festive little markets undergo a makeover that would make even the most ambitious reality TV home renovator blush. Talking changes so profound they could have their own dramatic voiceover. This time on medieval markets, Extreme Edition. The backdrop, the Protestant Reformation, a seismic shift in the religious landscape that introduced a new cast of characters and motivations, not least of which was good old Martin Luther. Ah, Luther. The man who nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church in 1517, and in doing so, inadvertently nailed down some changes for our Christmas markets too. See, Luther wasn't just about reforming the church. He also had some thoughts on how to spice up the holiday season. Enter his endorsement of gift-giving to children, a move that would have every modern-day child riding him into their Christmas lists. Prior to this, the holiday season was more about fasting than feasting, more about piety than presents. But Luther, with his penchant for making waves, saw gift-giving as a way to celebrate the Christkind, or Christ child, and to distract folks from the more Catholic tradition of venerating saints. This shift didn't just alter the spiritual landscape, it reshaped the market scene, encouraging vendors to stock up on toys and trinkets, turning the Christmas market into a veritable wonderland of consumer delights. And let's not forget the political power plays. Local rulers quickly realized that these burgeoning markets were gold mines, not literally, of course, but economically and symbolically. Picture this, a ruler striding through rows of stalls, nodding approvingly as merchants offered luxury goods not just for survival, but for sheer indulgence. These markets became stages for flaunting wealth and control, with rulers using them to showcase their prosperity to visiting dignitaries and common folk alike. There's nothing like a bit of conspicuous consumption to win over the masses and intimidate rivals, right? The markets evolved from practical fairs to showcases of opulence, where the aroma of roasted chestnuts mingled with the scent of ambition and political maneuvering. And speaking of luxury goods, the economic shift was significant. With the Reformation loosening the church's grip on commerce, the rise of a burgeoning middle class with a taste for finer things became apparent. The markets, no longer just about necessities, started featuring items that belonged more in a Renaissance fairy tale than a medieval grocery list. Fine silks, spices from distant lands, and intricate jewelry were now part of the festive tableau. Remember, this is a time when a fashionable lace collar could set you back more than a month's wages for a skilled worker. It was a consumer culture on the rise, and these markets were at its forefront, turning the tables from survival to splurge. In an ironic twist of fate, the Christmas market scene became a breeding ground for capitalism, despite the church's initial intentions. As townsfolk and travelers alike clamored for the latest must-have items, the wheels of commerce spun ever faster. The very markets that started as lifelines for winter survival now thrived on the desires of a society increasingly interested in the accumulation of goods. It's like watching history unfold in a way that would make Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, nod in understanding. The invisible hand was at work, and it was busy picking out the best gifts of the season. This evolution wasn't just confined to the economic realm, it also sparked a social transformation. Markets became melting pots of culture and commerce, where people from different walks of life mingled and exchanged stories, ideas, and yes, germs. Let's not forget the occasional outbreak of the plague, because nothing says holiday spirit like a bit of pestilence. Yet, these gatherings fostered a sense of community and connectivity, a temporary truce where social divisions blurred amidst the clamor of bargaining and the warmth of shared experiences. So, as we saunter through these centuries of change, it's clear that Christmas markets were more than just festive gatherings. They were arenas of economic innovation, political strategy, and social change. They were places where the spirit of the season intertwined with the spirit of enterprise, where the sounds of commerce became the carols of capitalism. And through it all, they retained a certain magic, a sense of wonder that continues to draw crowds today, long after the Reformation and its many revolutions have faded into the annals of history. Stay tuned, dear listeners, because there's more to come. We're not even close to unwrapping everything these markets have to offer. There's still the question of how they spread beyond the heart of Europe, how they survived wars and economic depressions, and how they became the global phenomenon we know today. For now, let's leave our tale with the vision of a bustling market square, filled with the hum of human enterprise and the promise of new beginnings. As the sun sets on the age of Reformation, we steamroll into the 19th century, where Christmas markets undergo a transformation so profound it could make a caterpillar to butterfly metamorphosis look like a simple wardrobe change. The Industrial Revolution, cue dramatic music, ushers in an era of rapid urbanization and technological advancement, turning these markets from mere local gatherings into bustling hubs of commerce and culture, worthy of a Dickensian novel. First stop on this journey of market evolution, the mighty railway. Now, if you're picturing quaint steam engines puffing through the countryside, you're not far off, but let's dig a little deeper. By the mid-1800, rail lines crisscrossed Europe like a toddler with a crayon and a blank wall. This new mode of transport was a game-changer for Christmas markets. Suddenly, the reach of these markets expanded far beyond the local town limits. Goods and people could travel faster and further than ever before. Think Amazon Prime, 19th century style. With these iron beasts chugging along, markets became accessible to a broader audience. Folks from the countryside could now make their way to urban centers with ease, and city dwellers could hop on a train for a day trip to a neighboring town's market. It was as if the world had suddenly become smaller, and in this shrunken world, Christmas markets became hotspots for cultural exchange and economic opportunity. A merchant from Dresden could now sell his goods in Leipzig on Tuesday, hop a train, and be in Berlin by Friday, ready to sell to a whole new crowd. Talk about market diversification. And then there was the tourism boom. With railways making travel more affordable, Christmas markets evolved into tourist attractions. Imagine Victorian families, decked out in their Sunday best, descending on these markets like it was the 19th century version of a theme park visit. It was a chance to escape the soot and grime of industrial cities for a day of festive cheer, or at the very least, a chance to buy some exotic goods and brag to your neighbors. But let's not romanticize too much. The reality was that these markets were often crowded, chaotic, and let's be honest, a pickpocket's playground. The mix of locals, tourists, and merchants created a vibrant yet volatile atmosphere. It was less silent night and more watch your wallet. Still, the allure of the markets was undeniable, a heady blend of commerce and culture that drew people in despite the risks. Now, let's sprinkle a little Victorian nostalgia on this already festive scene. The 19th century was a time when Christmas traditions were being invented left and right. Charles Dickens and his literary ilk cast a rosy glow over the holiday season with stories that celebrated family, giving, and the spirit of Christmas. This narrative seeped into the markets, transforming them into symbols of holiday cheer rather than just economic necessity. This period also saw the rise of the Christmas tree, a German import, thanks to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, who made it the seasonal must-have after decking out Windsor Castle with one in 1848. Let's tackle the myth of the timeless Christmas market, shall we? The notion that these markets have remained unchanged for centuries is as plausible as Santa fitting down a modern chimney. The truth is, they've evolved constantly, shaped by the economic, social, and political tides of their times. Each century left its mark, and the 19th was no exception. The Victorian era may have wrapped the markets in a cozy blanket of nostalgia, but beneath that veneer, they were dynamic entities, adapting to the needs and whims of their patrons. For instance, while we might envision quaint stalls filled with handcrafted wares, the reality was often mass-produced items churned out by the burgeoning factories of the Industrial Revolution. The handmade charm of yore was sometimes replaced by the efficiency of machine production, a nod to the changing times. This was capitalism in full swing, with markets reflecting the industrial and consumer shifts of the era. And let's not ignore the social dynamics. The influx of people into cities thanks to industrialization meant that these markets became microcosms of the changing world. They were places where the old ways met new innovations, where tradition rubbed shoulders with progress. Here, a farmer might haggle over the price of a hand-carved toy, while a factory worker snapped up shiny new baubles for the tree. It was a melting pot of classes and cultures, a testament to the era's complexities and contradictions. So, as we stand amidst the bustling stalls of a 19th century Christmas market, let's appreciate the layers of history that brought us here. From medieval survival fairs to Victorian spectacles of nostalgia and commerce, these markets are a testament to human adaptability and the enduring spirit of the season. Stay tuned, because our journey doesn't end here. There's still more to explore as we continue to unwrap the history of Christmas markets, each layer revealing new insights and surprises. As we leave the 19th century Christmas market, awash in Victorian sentimentality and Dickensian charm, we're about to jump into a century where the world seems to hit the fast-forward button. The 20th century, my friends, is a roller coaster ride of epic proportions. 2 world wars, economic upheavals, and the dawn of globalization. Hold onto your festive hats, because Christmas markets aren't just tagging along for the ride. They're being transformed right along with everything else. First up, World War I. The Great War brought devastation across Europe, and Christmas markets weren't immune to the chaos. Many markets were suspended as towns struggled with war and its aftermath. It's hard to focus on mulled wine and gingerbread when your town square is now a recruitment center, or worse, a bomb crater. But like a phoenix rising from the ashes, or maybe a particularly stubborn Christmas tree, they re-emerged in the 1920s, albeit a bit worse for wear. Then came the 1930s, when the Great Depression had markets feeling less holiday cheer and more economic despair. With unemployment rates soaring, Germany saw nearly 30% unemployment during the early 30s. Festive spending took a nosedive. The markets that did open were more about penny-pinching practicality than luxurious indulgence. Economic survival was the name of the game, which meant fewer frivolous baubles and more emphasis on affordable necessities. Yet, even in these bleak times, the markets soldiered on, a testament to their resilience and cultural significance. World War II dealt another blow, with markets once again shuddering across much of Europe. But here's where things take an interesting turn. Post-war, these markets became more than just places to buy goods. They transformed into symbols of hope and normalcy in a shattered world. In 1947, Just 2 years after the war ended, the Nuremberg Christkindlesmarkt reopened and drew an astounding crowd of 1.2 million visitors. It was a beacon of light in a dark time, signaling a return to tradition and community spirit. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and we find ourselves in the throes of globalization. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was a watershed moment, not just politically, but culturally. The reunification of East and West Germany breathed new life into the Christmas market scene, particularly in the former East, where markets had been suppressed under Soviet influence. Suddenly, these markets became a symbol of European unity and shared cultural heritage. They were no longer just local affairs. They were international events, attracting tourists from around the globe. By the 1990s, Christmas markets were popping up outside Europe like reindeer on a snow globe. North America, Asia, and even Australia caught the Christmas market bug, importing this European tradition with varying degrees of authenticity. Some were delightful replicas, complete with genuine German bratwurst and Glühwein, while others veered into kitsch territory with Santa hats made in China and plastic snowflakes dangling in the 30-degree Australian heat. Ah, globalization, where cultural exchange sometimes feels more like cultural mishmash. Let's chat about the commercialization of these markets, shall we? While some purists decry the commercialization as the Grinch who stole Christmas spirit, there's no denying the economic boost these markets bring. In 2019, the German Christmas market industry alone was worth a staggering €5 billion. That's billion with a B, folks. The markets have become economic powerhouses, not just for local artisans, but for entire regions relying on the December influx of tourists and holiday shoppers. However, with commercialization comes a certain level of chaos, and dare we say, charm. Themed markets have exploded in popularity, offering everything from medieval reenactments to Harry Potter Christmas extravaganzas. Sure, they can be a bit over the top, but they're also a testament to our love of spectacle and nostalgia. Who wouldn't want to sip butterbeer while browsing stalls filled with wizarding wares? It's a delightful blend of fantasy and festivity, even if it does occasionally veer into the absurd. But let's not sugarcoat things too much. The reality is that commercialization has its downsides. The quest for profit can sometimes overshadow the original spirit of these markets, turning them into expensive tourist traps. An artisanal ornament might set you back more than a fancy dinner, and don't even get me started on the price of some of those imported delicacies. The balance between preserving tradition and embracing modern economics is a delicate one, and not every market gets it right. Yet, despite the commercial trappings, there's an undeniable magic to these markets that keeps us coming back year after year. The blend of twinkling lights, festive music, and the smell of roasting chestnuts creates an atmosphere that's hard to resist. It's a sensory overload in the best possible way, a place where the hustle and bustle of modern life fades into the background, if only for a moment. So, as we wrap up this segment of our Christmas market journey, let's appreciate the complexities and contradictions they embody. From their medieval roots to their modern incarnations, these markets are a microcosm of history, reflecting the economic, social, and political shifts of their times. They're a blend of romance and reality, nostalgia and novelty, chaos and charm. And as we brace ourselves for the final chapter, let's hold onto that sense of wonder, ready to uncover what else these markets have in store for us. Stay tuned, because the story isn't over yet. Ah, Christmas markets, where tradition and globalization meet like old friends who sometimes squabble over who's picking up the tab. Today, these markets are a curious blend of nostalgia and novelty, steeped in centuries of tradition, yet constantly adapting to the whims of a digital age. Let's dive into how these festive fairs have transformed in the 21st century, from Instagrammable moments to online shopping sprees. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or should I say, the smartphone in the hand. Social media has turned Christmas markets into a visual spectacle, where the twinkling lights and quaint wooden stalls offer the perfect backdrop for your latest Instagram post. Forget the medieval mud pits. Today's visitors are more concerned about capturing the perfect selfie with a steaming cup of mulled wine. Christmas market goals, anyone? In fact, a 2018 survey found that nearly 60% of visitors cited taking photos for social media as a top reason for attending these markets, a statistic that would likely leave medieval merchants scratching their heads in confusion. But digital technology hasn't just reshaped how we capture the moment, it's also revolutionized how we shop. Enter the era of online Christmas markets, where you can purchase handcrafted ornaments from the comfort of your couch, wrapped in a snug blanket, sipping hot cocoa. It's a world where the charm of a bustling market square is condensed into a few clicks and a Wi-Fi connection. In Germany alone, online sales attributed to Christmas markets reached over euros 500 million in 2022, showing us that, while the market experience has moved online, the appetite for festive shopping is as insatiable as ever. Yet, with this digital evolution comes an existential dilemma. Are we losing the very essence of what makes Christmas markets special? The tactile joy of browsing stalls, the mingling of aromas from food vendors, and the cheerful clamor of holiday shoppers, all of which can't be bottled into an algorithm. Here lies the crux of the matter. Technology provides convenience at the expense of experience, and as we scroll through endless online catalogs, one can't help but wonder if we're trading authenticity for accessibility. Let's not forget the challenges that Christmas markets face in today's climate-challenged world, both metaphorically and literally. As temperatures rise, the traditional snowy market scenes are becoming as rare as a reindeer siding in the Sahara. Climate change is forcing markets to rethink their approach, from sourcing sustainable materials to reducing carbon footprints. In 2021, the Frankfurt Christmas Market introduced a green stall initiative, requiring vendors to use eco-friendly packaging and renewable energy sources. It's a step in the right direction, but there's still a long way to go before sustainability becomes the norm rather than the exception. And while we're on the topic of going green, let's talk about the economic footprint of these festive gatherings. Christmas markets are big business, injecting millions into local economies each year. The Vienna Christmas Market alone attracts over 3 million visitors annually, generating an estimated euros 150 million in economic activity. But with great power comes great responsibility, and the pressure is on to balance economic gain with environmental stewardship. Yet despite the challenges and changes, the enduring appeal of Christmas markets is undeniable. They offer a nostalgic escape, a chance to step into a world where the holidays feel timeless, even if only for an evening. But are they truly a relic of the past, or have they cleverly reinvented themselves as savvy purveyors of holiday commerce? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. They are both a nod to history and a mirror reflecting our modern desires, a place where the past and present dance in a delicate waltz. So, as we wrap up this journey through the centuries, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexities and contradictions of Christmas markets. They are a tapestry woven from the threads of history, culture, and commerce, a place where the spirit of the season is both celebrated and commodified, where tradition meets innovation in a festive embrace. Like a well-loved holiday ornament, they carry the weight of memories and the promise of future joy. In the end, Christmas markets remind us that while the world around us may change, the human desire for connection, celebration, and a little bit of magic remains constant. They are a testament to our adaptability and ingenuity, a reflection of who we are and who we aspire to be. So the next time you find yourself wandering through a market, whether in a bustling city square or from the comfort of your own home, remember that you're part of a story that has been centuries in the making, a tale of resilience, reinvention, and the enduring wonder of the holiday season. Pericles, the Athenian dynamo who moonwalked across the stage of Greece's golden age, had a childhood that was less party in the Parthenon and more quiet evenings with Anaxagoras. Back in those days, Athens wasn't the philosophical Disneyland we think of today. It was more like a toddler with a sugar high, buzzing with political tension and drama. You see, Athens was a hotbed of ideas, power struggles, and the occasional ostracism, where getting kicked out of the city wasn't just a metaphorical concept for cancel culture, but a literal one. Now, Pericles wasn't just any kid in the agora. He was the son of Xanthippus. Yes, Xanthippus, a name that sounds like a word your spell checker might balk at, and a man who had carved his own legend by leading Athens to victory at the Battle of Mycale in 479 BC. But let's not get carried away by cinematic visions of father-son bonding over war stories and strategy. Xanthippus was a hero, sure, but he was also a domineering presence with expectations as high as the Acropolis. The kind of guy who probably wouldn't be impressed unless you conquered a small nation before breakfast. Pericles grew up in a society that was a mix of brilliance and chaos. Athens was experimenting with democracy, a system so new that people were still scratching their heads over who got to vote and when. Here's a fun fact. Only male citizens over 18 could participate, so roughly 10% of the population. Women, slaves, and foreigners. Well, they got a front-row seat to watch the drama unfold without any say in the script. As for Pericles, he was being molded by some of the sharpest minds of his time. His education was like a greatest hits album of ancient wisdom, featuring philosophers who could outthink their way out of a labyrinth. Enter Anaxagoras, Pericles' mentor, a man who dared to suggest that the sun was a glowing rock rather than a divine chariot, a theory that didn't exactly win him friends in religious circles. This was before Twitter, but if it had existed, Anaxagoras definitely would have been trending, probably for all the wrong reasons. Pericles' early years were spent absorbing these revolutionary ideas, which was far from the norm. While other kids might have been learning how to wield a spear, Pericles was learning to wield thought, practicing the art of rhetoric and strategy. This intellectual training ground was about as calm as a cat on a caffeine binge, with debates that could go from zero to philosophical in the blink of an eye. But what about the politics of the time? The Athenian political scene was like a soap opera with more intrigue and fewer commercial breaks. Athens was rising as a cultural and economic powerhouse, but its internal politics were as stable as a Jenga tower in a windstorm. Factionalism was rampant, with aristocrats bickering like it was an Olympic sport. The city-state was caught between the old guard of aristocratic power and the new waves of democratic reform. It was a world where leaders could be celebrated one day and ostracized the next, a society where public opinion was as fickle as the Mediterranean weather. And in the midst of all this, young Pericles was carving out his own identity. Despite his father's larger-than-life shadow, Pericles wasn't content to be just the son of a war hero. He was on a quest to blend the martial prowess of his lineage with the cerebral dynamism of his mentors. It was a balancing act worthy of a tightrope walker, and it set the stage for his transformation into the legendary statesman we remember today. By the time Pericles started to make his own mark, Athens was already a city on the brink of greatness. The Persian Wars had left a legacy of unity and victory, yet the city was grappling with the question of what came next. The Delian League was formed, ostensibly to defend against future threats. Really, it was Athens' not-so-subtle way of saying, "We're in charge now." This was ancient geopolitics at its finest, with Athens collecting tribute like a big brother demanding lunch money. Pericles, equipped with his philosophical training and strategic acumen, was perfectly poised to navigate this complex landscape. His early experiences, from his philosophical debates to his lessons in leadership under Xanthippus' stern eye, had honed his abilities to a fine edge. He was ready to step into the spotlight, a place where the stakes were as high as the columns he'd led a commission for the Parthenon. In the end, the young Pericles was less of a rock star in the making and more of a strategic visionary, quietly biding his time amidst the chaos and brilliance of Athens. His early life was a testament to the power of knowledge, the influence of a strong parental figure, and the impact of a city in flux. As Athens simmered with potential and peril, Pericles was getting ready to turn up the heat in ways that would change the city, and indeed the world, forever. As the curtain rose on Pericles' political career, Athens was a city teeming with ambition, and Pericles was about to make his entrance like a masterful conductor, stepping up to lead an orchestra teetering on the edge of chaos. His early forays into the political scene were anything but timid. He wasn't content to be a background player in the Athenian drama. He was ready to write the script, direct the cast, and maybe throw in a plot twist or two for good measure. Pericles' ascent began in the assembly, that unruly forum where Athenian men gathered to shout, vote, and occasionally hurl insults that would make a modern politician blush. Here he honed his skills as an orator, a talent that would become his signature weapon. His speeches were like a verbal symphony, designed to inspire, persuade, and occasionally dazzle the audience into forgetting their disagreements. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a TED talk, but with more toga and less technology. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The political landscape was as treacherous as a minefield, with factions vying for control and power plays as common as olives at a Greek feast. Pericles, however, had the strategic mind of a chess grandmaster, always thinking several moves ahead. One of his early strategies was to align himself with the populist faction. This wasn't just a political maneuver, it was a masterstroke. By championing the cause of the common people, Pericles was able to position himself as a leader who understood the needs of the many, not just the elite few. And then there was the public treasury. The public treasury, a tempting pot of gold that, if mismanaged, could spell political disaster faster than you can say ostracism. Pericles, however, saw it as an opportunity. He understood that the way to win hearts and minds was through the arts. So he funneled funds into cultural projects, transforming Athens into an artistic metropolis. This wasn't just about beautifying the city. It was about creating a legacy that would outlast any political term or military conquest. This brings us to one of Pericles' most legendary, yet controversial, endeavors, the building of the Parthenon. Completed in 432 BC, this architectural marvel was more than just a temple. It was a statement. Standing proud on the Acropolis, it proclaimed Athens' dominance and cultural superiority. The Parthenon was built at a staggering cost of around 469 silver talents, equivalent to millions of dollars today, give or take a few drachmas. Critics of the time argued that such an expenditure was extravagant, bordering on hubris, especially when the funds were originally intended for the defense of the city. But Pericles was nothing if not a master of spin. To him, this was not a vanity project. It was a civic duty. By investing in monumental architecture and public art, he was creating jobs and boosting the economy. The construction of the Parthenon alone employed thousands of Athenians, from artisans and sculptors to laborers and suppliers. It was a stimulus package wrapped in marble and mythology. Of course, Pericles wasn't just building temples and statues. He was building a brand. Athens was to be the cultural capital of the ancient world, and Pericles was its chief marketer. He understood the power of image and the importance of narrative, a lesson as relevant today as it was in the 5th century BC. In a world where the line between myth and history often blurred, Pericles was crafting a story that would resonate through the ages. Yet, for all his accomplishments, Pericles was no stranger to controversy. His use of the Delian League's treasury to fund these projects was a sore point among the League's members. They had signed up for mutual protection, not to bankroll Athens' cultural ambitions. This tension would simmer beneath the surface, like a volcano waiting to erupt, casting a shadow over Pericles' legacy. Still, there was no denying the transformative impact of Pericles' leadership. Under his guidance, Athens flourished, experiencing a golden age that would inspire future generations. The city's population swelled to around 300,000, and its influence stretched across the Mediterranean. The arts thrived, democracy matured, and philosophers pondered questions that remain relevant today. In the end, Pericles' rise to power was a study in political acumen and strategic vision. He was the ultimate pragmatist, willing to take risks and challenge conventions to achieve his goals. Whether you see him as a visionary leader or a shrewd manipulator depends on your perspective. But what's undeniable is that Pericles left an indelible mark on Athens and the world, setting the stage for a cultural renaissance that continues to captivate our imaginations. As the city-state basked in its newfound glory, the seeds of future challenges were quietly being sown. Pericles, ever the strategist, knew that maintaining Athens' supremacy would require more than just marble columns and grand speeches. The political games were far from over, and the stakes were about to get even higher. But that's a story for another day, as the drama of Athens under Pericles continues to unfold. And so, as Pericles played the maestro of Athens, orchestrating the city's golden symphony, his next movements were as bold as they were calculated. This was the era of reforms, innovations that some lauded as democratic brilliance, while others sniffed out as nothing more than political sleight of hand. Take his citizenship laws, for example, which were tighter than a drum. Pericles decreed that only those with 2 Athenian parents could claim the coveted title of citizen. If you thought your bouncer was strict at the club last Saturday, try getting past Pericles with a foreign-born mom or dad. This policy wasn't just about keeping the Athenian bloodline pure. It was a strategic move to consolidate power and resources among a select group who could support his grand visions. Fewer citizens meant fewer hands in the proverbial cookie jar of state benefits, ensuring that resources were concentrated where Pericles could count on loyalty. But let's not pretend this was solely about Athens' well-being. It was also a way to curtail the influx of foreign influence, which was kind of awkward, considering Athens' cultural boom was as international as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And what a boom it was! The arts flourished like never before. You had Sophocles and Euripides crafting dramas that would make even the most jaded Netflix binge-watcher sit up and take notice. Sculptors like Phidias were turning out masterpieces, creating gods and heroes in marble and bronze that still leave us mere mortals slack-jawed with awe. Athens became the cultural envy of the world, a place where the word Renaissance was still several centuries away from being coined, but was happening in real time. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of marble and poetry. This cultural explosion wasn't just for the love of beauty. It was Pericles' way of making Athens the shining star of the ancient world. Think of it as ancient influencer marketing. The city was the canvas, and Pericles was the artist, turning patronage into a tool for political power. Every sculpture, every play, every philosophical dialogue was a testament to Athenian superiority, a cleverly crafted narrative where the city-state was cast as both hero and hegemon. Meanwhile, on the foreign policy front, Pericles juggled alliances like a circus performer with a penchant for diplomacy and drama. The Delian League, initially Athens' insurance policy against Persian aggression, had morphed into an empire in all but name. Member states were expected to pay tribute, funding an Athenian navy that was as formidable as it was necessary. After all, nothing says we're in charge, quite like a fleet of triremes cutting through the Aegean Sea like butter. But not everyone was thrilled with Athens' ascendancy. Sparta, that ever-grim, spear-wielding neighbor, was watching with growing unease. The Peloponnesian League, led by the Spartans, viewed Athens' power with suspicion and a touch of envy. With Pericles at the helm, Athens was not just a city, but a symbol of democratic ideals clashing against the oligarchic Spartan way. It was a geopolitical ballet with more tension than a high-stakes poker game, and Pericles was the man keeping Athens on its toes, even as the drums of war began to echo ominously in the distance. Back at home, Pericles had to ensure that the democratic experiment didn't implode under its own contradictions. He expanded the jury system, paying citizens to serve, which, let's be honest, was as much about increasing civic participation as it was about keeping the unemployed off the streets and out of trouble. It was a masterstroke of social engineering. Give people a stake in the system, and they are far less likely to topple it. In the agora, the heart of Athenian public life, ideas were exchanged with the fervor of a stock market on caffeine. Philosophers, politicians, and citizens alike debated the issues of the day, from the ethical ramifications of war to the newest plays by Aristophanes. It was a society that thrived on discourse, where rhetoric was as lethal as any weapon forged by the blacksmith's hand. And through it all, Pericles remained the unflappable statesman, his reputation as steady as the Parthenon's columns. His leadership style was a blend of charisma and pragmatism, a balancing act of idealism and realpolitik. Critics might have whispered about his autocratic tendencies, but to many Athenians, he was the embodiment of their city's aspirations, a leader who could articulate a vision while deftly navigating the treacherous waters of public opinion. Yet, even as Athens basked in its golden age, the seeds of discontent were being sown. Pericles' policies, while visionary, were also divisive. The Delian League's tribute system, perceived by some as Athenian extortion, bred resentment. And as funds flowed into Athens, the city-state's insatiable appetite for expansion and influence was setting the stage for conflict. But before the storm could break, Pericles had one more card to play. He launched an ambitious building program that would transform Athens into the jewel of the ancient world. The Odeon of Pericles was constructed, a hall for music and performance that echoed with the sounds of Athenian culture reaching new heights. And let's not forget the long walls, those impressive fortifications that connected Athens to its port of Piraeus, ensuring the city could withstand a siege while maintaining its naval supremacy. This was Pericles' Athens, a city of stone and spirit, poised on the precipice of history. His reforms had reshaped the political landscape, his cultural investments had redefined artistic achievement, and his foreign policy had secured Athens' place at the center of the known world. Yet, as the city basked in its golden glow, the horizon was darkening. No narrative of Athens in this era is complete without acknowledging the growing tensions that threatened to unravel Pericles' tapestry of achievements. Sparta, the ever-watchful adversary, was not content to let Athens shine unchallenged. The Peloponnesian War loomed like a thunderhead, and Pericles, the consummate strategist, knew that the coming conflict would test the very fabric of his city's greatness. As we leave this chapter, Athens stands as a beacon of culture and democratic experiment, its influence radiating across the Mediterranean. Pericles, the architect of its ascendance, remains at the helm, his vision both a gift and a burden. The stage is set for the next act in this epic drama, where the stakes will be higher, the challenge is greater, and the legacy of Athens' golden age hangs in the balance. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another time. As Athens stood poised on the brink of history, basking in the glow of its cultural and political zenith, the shadows of impending conflict loomed large. Enter stage left, the Peloponnesian War, that epic showdown between Athens and Sparta, where the stakes were higher than a philosopher's eyebrows during a debate on metaphysics. Pericles, our maestro of the Athenian stage, was about to face the ultimate test of his leadership, and let's just say his strategies were more hold my wine than tactical genius. Now, the backdrop to this drama was a city at its peak, with a population of around 300,000 souls crammed into its lively confines. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility, and a heaping side of envy from your neighbors. Sparta, that stoic land of warriors and minimalists, had been eyeing Athens' rise with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for a Greek tragedy's plot twist. The tension was thicker than the olive oil the Athenians drizzled on everything. To understand why these two powerhouses came to blows, let's unravel the tangled web of alliances and rivalries. The Delian League, initially formed to counter the Persian threat, had morphed into an Athenian empire in all but name. Athens called the shots, collected the tributes, and flexed its naval muscles like a bodybuilder at a beachside contest. Sparta, leading the Peloponnesian League, saw Athens' dominance as a threat to their own way of life, a society where simplicity, discipline, and a rigid social structure reigned supreme. Pericles, ever the strategist, believed that the best defense was a good offense, or rather, a strategic retreat behind the mighty long walls of Athens. His plan was to avoid land battles with the Spartan hoplites, who were as formidable as they were fashionably monochromatic. Instead, he banked on Athens' naval superiority to keep the city supplied and strike Spartan territories along the coast. This was the ancient equivalent of playing the long game, but it came with the risk of turning Athens into a pressure cooker of pent-up citizens, all cooped up within the city's walls. The year was 431 BC, when the simmering tensions finally boiled over into open conflict. The Spartan king Archidamus Roman II marched into Athenian territory, and Pericles' plans swung into action, or inaction, depending on your perspective. The Athenians, accustomed to open spaces and the freedom of their fertile countryside, found themselves retreating behind their walls, a move that was about as popular as a politician at a tax-raising rally. The countryside was left to the mercy of Spartan raids, and the fields, once lush with crops, became the stage for scorched-earth tactics. But while Pericles' strategy may have seemed more keep calm and carry on than charge into glory, it was underpinned by a certain logic. He banked on Athens' economic and naval strength to outlast the Spartans, who were better suited to short, decisive engagements than protracted sieges. Unfortunately, what Pericles didn't anticipate was the silent enemy lurking within the city walls, an enemy that needed no sword or spear to wreak havoc. Cue the plague of Athens, a grim twist in the tale that even the most cynical playwright might have deemed over the top. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill sniffles. It was a full-blown epidemic that swept through the city like a vengeful god's wrath. The plague struck in 430 BC, killing an estimated 75,000 to 100,000 000 Athenians, about a quarter of the population, and it didn't discriminate between citizens and leaders. Even Pericles, the architect of Athenian glory, found his family ravaged by the disease, losing his two legitimate sons, Xanthippus and Pericles. The plague didn't just decimate the population, it tore at the very fabric of Athenian society. Order broke down as desperation and despair took hold. The agora, once a vibrant marketplace of ideas and goods, became a place of mourning and chaos. In this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, Pericles delivered his famous funeral oration, a speech that has echoed through the ages as a testament to Athenian resilience and ideals, or as a master class in keeping spirits up when the chips are down. Delivered in 431 BC, this oration honored the fallen soldiers of the first year of the war, but it was also Pericles' bid to rally his fellow citizens. With rhetorical flair that would make any modern spin doctor proud, he painted a picture of Athens as the pinnacle of civilization, a city of freedom and democracy that stood as a beacon to its allies and a warning to its enemies. Critics might say it was a tad self-congratulatory, but then again, who doesn't love a good pep talk when things look bleak? Yet, for all its soaring prose, the oration also laid bare the stark reality of wartime Athens. It was a city under siege, not just by external forces, but by internal strife and disease. The ideals Pericles extolled were being tested by grim necessity, and the very democracy he championed was under pressure from the exigencies of war. It was a moment of profound irony. Athens, the cradle of democracy, was being strangled by the very mechanisms that had once promised its people freedom and prosperity. In the aftermath of the plague, Pericles faced mounting criticism. His political rivals seized the opportunity to discredit him, blaming his policies for the city's suffering. In a stunning turn of events, Pericles was removed from office and fined. Yet, Athens wasn't quite ready to let go of its most illustrious leader. Within a year, he was reinstated, a testament to the fact that even in the throes of disaster, Pericles' vision for Athens still resonated with many of its citizens. But the toll was undeniable. The war dragged on, and Athens' resources were stretched thin. The very strategies that had once seemed prudent now felt like chains, binding the city to a course that promised no easy resolution. And yet, the spirit of Athens endured, a testament to the resilience and determination that Pericles had sought to embody in his leadership. As we leave this tumultuous chapter, Athens remains a city beset by challenges, its future uncertain, but its legacy secure. Pericles' dream of a glorious Athens had been tested by fire and disease, but his vision of a city that stood as a symbol of human achievement and aspiration continued to inspire. The stage was set for new struggles, new leaders, and new chapters in this epic tale of ambition, ideals, and the enduring quest for greatness. But for now, we pause, with more of the story yet to unfold. The stage may have been set for new struggles, but Pericles' final act was already underway, and it was as complicated as a Greek salad with extra olives. In 429 BC, Athens' maestro of policy and marble faced his curtain call, succumbing to the plague that had ravaged his city. The man who had once commanded the stage with blistering oratory and grand visions was now a victim of the very crisis he sought to navigate. No amount of strategic brilliance could fend off the microbes that leveled rich and poor, citizen and leader alike. It was a humbling end for a man who had danced so deftly on the political high wire. With his passing, the spotlight turned to the legacy he left behind, a legacy as multifaceted as the Parthenon's friezes. Pericles had been an architect of Athens' golden age, a period of cultural and political flourishing that placed the city at the pinnacle of the ancient world. But let's not sugarcoat it. While his achievements were monumental, they came with a price tag that would make even the most extravagant spenders blush. His building projects were funded by the Delian League's coffers, a financial maneuver that smacked of empire building rather than mutual defense. It was as if Pericles had taken out a credit card in the League's name and splurged on an artistic shopping spree. Yet, despite the fiscal gymnastics, Pericles' vision turned Athens into a beacon of culture and intellectual achievement. The city was a magnet for thinkers, artists, and statesmen, its streets echoing with the philosophies of Socrates and the comedies of Aristophanes. The arts and architecture were not mere vanity projects. They were investments in a legacy that would outlast the man himself. This was Pericles' Athens, a living testament to the power of culture as a tool for political influence. His ability to blend civic pride with grand ambitions was nothing short of genius. He had, in essence, turned Athens into history's first cultural superpower. However, the reality was messier than the marble facades let on. Political foes and allies alike would soon realize that the vacuum left by Pericles' death was more of a black hole, a gravitational void that threatened to pull Athens into chaos. His political adversaries, once kept in check by Pericles' deft maneuvering, now saw an opportunity to assert themselves. The once united front of Athenian democracy began to splinter, with factions vying for power like contestants in an ancient reality show. The political landscape turned into a battlefield of rhetoric and ambition, with alliances forming and dissolving faster than you could say ostracism. As for Athens, the city was now a ship adrift in turbulent seas. The Peloponnesian War dragged on for another quarter-century, turning what had been a showcase of democracy into a cautionary tale of hubris and overreach. The war sapped Athens of its resources and morale, and the city that had once stood as a beacon of democratic ideals found itself embroiled in a conflict that would ultimately lead to its downfall. The very strategies that Pericles had championed now seemed like relics of a bygone era, unsuited to the grim realities of prolonged warfare. Yet, while the immediate future was bleak, the echoes of Pericles' legacy reverberated through history. His vision of Athens as a center of culture and intellect persisted, influencing generations long after the last marble block was set in place on the Acropolis. The philosophical and artistic achievements that flourished under his leadership continued to inspire, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance and beyond. In a world where power and legacy often go hand in hand, Pericles managed to carve out a place for Athens in the annals of history, a city whose cultural contributions would far outlive its political dominance. So, was Pericles a visionary leader or a savvy crowd-pleaser? Perhaps a bit of both. He was a master of oratory and strategy, but also a man whose ambitions sometimes blurred the lines between public service and personal glory. His ability to work a crowd was unmatched, turning public opinion to his favor with speeches that were both rousing and reassuring. Yet, his policies were not without criticism, particularly his handling of the Delian League funds and his stringent citizenship laws. He was a man of contradictions, embodying both the promise and peril of democratic leadership. In the end, Pericles' story is a reminder that history is rarely a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's more like a series of unfortunate events, punctuated by moments of brilliance and folly. His Athens was a city of dualities, an epitome of cultural achievement and a cautionary tale of imperial overreach. The golden age he helped forge was as fleeting as it was magnificent, a testament to the complexities of leadership and the unpredictability of human ambition. As we draw the curtain on Pericles' tale, we're left to ponder the tangled web of history, a narrative woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, where the legacies of leaders like Pericles continue to shape our understanding of greatness and its costs. Whether you view him as a statesman or a strategist, there's no denying that Pericles left an indelible mark on the world. His dream of a thriving, cultural Athens may have been tested by the trials of war and plague, but it ultimately carved a legacy that would inspire and endure, reminding us that the pursuit of greatness is a journey fraught with both peril and promise. The rooster's crow is your medieval alarm clock, and it doesn't come with a snooze button. Welcome to your life as a Saxon farmer in 9th century Wessex, where the morning light creeps over the thatched roofs and you're already late for the day's chores. You roll out of bed, probably a straw-stuffed mattress that leaves your back resembling a topographical map of the Somerset levels. But hey, at least you don't have to deal with rush-hour traffic, unless you count avoiding stepping on the family chicken. First stop, breakfast. Forget avocado toast or a double-shot soy latte. Your pantry is more like a medieval Whole Foods, minus the pretentious price tags. Bread is a staple, usually a dense rye loaf that doubles as a handy doorstop. If it's a good day, you'll have some cheese, probably aged enough to be called vintage, if you were selling it at a modern-day farmer's market. And then there's the porridge, gruel. If you want to sound particularly Dickensian, which is basically oats boiled into submission. It's not glamorous, but it sticks to your ribs, which is exactly what you need when your day involves more physical exertion than a cross-fit session. As you munch, you're already planning the day's work. The very earth beneath your feet is your livelihood, and grain is your go-to investment. Wheat, barley, and oats are your bread and butter, literally and figuratively, making up most of your diet and your income. You're essentially a human granary. In a good year, you might harvest 600 kilograms of wheat from just a couple of acres, but Mother Nature has a notoriously fickle personality. A wet summer could mean moldy crops and a lean winter, so you're always keeping an eye on the sky, hoping for just the right balance of sun and rain. Now, about that pig you've got grunting around the farmyard. It's not just a barnyard friend. It's your porcine 401k. Livestock is your savings account, and this pig is a particularly juicy asset. It can be slaughtered for meat, but it's also useful alive for its ability to sniff out acorns and truffles, the medieval version of a treasure hunt. If you're feeling particularly entrepreneurial, you might even barter it for goods or services. Either way, this pig is a far more reliable investment than any crypto. But let's not sugarcoat it. There's a cloud hanging over your bucolic breakfast. Viking paranoia is as much a part of your daily life as the morning dew. You've heard the horror stories, whispered over flickering candles in the mead hall. Raiders with wild hair and wilder eyes, descending like locusts, ready to pillage, plunder, and generally ruin your day. It's enough to make anyone a bit jumpy, and you've probably got a stash of weapons somewhere, just in case. A sword, maybe, or a trusty axe, if you're lucky enough to own one. Otherwise, a good sturdy stick might have to do. This is your life, where every day is a balancing act between survival and sustenance, between fear and fortitude. You've got a farm to run, a family to feed, and a future to protect, all under the constant shadow of Viking sails on the horizon. But for now, you've got bread to chew, fields to plow, and a pig to keep an eye on. So finish your breakfast, because the day's work waits for no one, not even in 9th century Wessex. With breakfast done and dusted, you're ready to hit the fields, which, let's face it, is your medieval version of a gym membership, minus the juice bar and with a lot more mud. Your trusty scratch plough awaits, a marvel of engineering if you squint hard enough and have a glass or two of mead. It's a simple device, essentially a wooden beam with an iron blade. But in the 9th century, it's cutting-edge technology, pun totally intended. Now, you might think farming is just about digging holes and planting seeds, but it's actually a tactical game that would make a chess grandmaster sweat. Let's talk crop rotations. You don't just throw seeds into the ground willy-nilly. No, my friend, you're engaging in a complex system of agricultural strategy. Enter the three-field system, the medieval equivalent of the latest iPhone. You've got one field for autumn planting, one for spring, and one left fallow to rest. It's the agricultural version of a day spa for your fields, and it's revolutionized farming, boosting productivity like a medieval Red Bull. But let's pause for a moment and admire the absurdity of the situation. You're essentially playing a centuries-long game of rock, paper, scissors with Mother Nature, hoping she's in a good mood this season. One bad harvest, and it's not just your diet that gets leaner, it's your entire community's survival on the line. You're not just a farmer, you're a high-stakes gambler, betting against the elements with your scratch plow as the only ace up your sleeve. As you push that plow, consider the economic weight of your labor. That wheat you're planting isn't just the bread in your future sandwich, it's currency. In a good year, you might yield around 600 kilograms of the stuff from a couple of acres. It's your ticket to trade and barter, a tangible asset in a world where coins are scarce and usually jingling in someone else's pocket. Speaking of pockets, let's not forget the social hierarchy that rules your life. You're at the bottom, toiling away, but there's always someone above you ready to remind you of your place. Maybe it's the local lord, lounging in his manor, or the reeve, the medieval equivalent of a middle manager, overseeing the village work with a keen eye and a knack for delegation. Now, about complaining. Forget about sending a strongly worded email to customer service when the weather doesn't cooperate. Mother Nature doesn't have a suggestion box. You're left grumbling to yourself and maybe, just maybe, muttering a few words to the local priest, hoping divine intervention might swing your way. It's a futile effort, but sometimes you just need to vent, even if no one's listening. As you work, you might dream of an easier life, a life where you're not constantly at the mercy of unpredictable weather patterns or Viking raids. But then again, you're part of a centuries-old tradition, a chain of farmers stretching back into the mists of time. Each furrow you carve into the earth is a testament to human endurance, a stubborn refusal to let the world's chaos dictate your fate. And speaking of chaos, let's not forget those Vikings lurking in the back of your mind, the wild card in your otherwise meticulously planned year. You're ready for them, or at least as ready as you can be, with a stash of weapons and a keen eye on the horizon. But today, it's just you, your plough, and the endless expanse of your fields. The sun is shining, the earth is rich, and for a brief moment, all is right in your corner of Wessex. As the day wears on, you feel the weight of your work, the relentless rhythm of farming life. It's exhausting, sure, but there's a certain satisfaction in it. You're not just tilling soil, you're crafting the very fabric of your existence, one furrow at a time. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows over your fields, and you pause to admire your handiwork. The plough rests against a tree, a faithful companion in your daily battle against the elements. Tired but not defeated, you head back to your cottage, the scent of the earth lingering on your clothes. You glance up at the sky, a patchwork of orange and purple as the sun sets. Tomorrow the cycle begins anew, but for now you savor the quiet, the calm before the next storm, literal or metaphorical. It's a tough life, but it's yours, and in the grand tapestry of history, you're one of countless threads, weaving a story that stretches across the ages. As the sun sets and another day of farming heroics concludes, your thoughts drift to the market tomorrow. You'll swap the plough for a penny and the fields for a flurry of trade. Welcome to the medieval mall, where the aisles are muddy paths and your shopping cart is your own two hands. Now, let's talk pennies, because in 9th century Wessex, they're worth their weight in, well, not gold, but something valuable enough to make you think twice before spending it. A silver penny is your basic unit of currency, and while it might jingle enticingly in your pocket, don't get too excited. This little disc of silver could buy you a decent amount of grain or perhaps a modest piece of cloth. But remember, it's not exactly a license to splurge. In fact, if you're expecting to walk away with a basket full of luxuries, think again. Your penny is more of a keep-you-alive budget than a live-it-up one. Ah, the market, a place where commerce and chaos collide. Picture it, a cacophony of voices haggling, the clink of coinage, the smell of freshly baked bread mingling with the less pleasant aroma of livestock. It's a medieval symphony, with you as one of the players, trying to strike a deal without losing your shirt, literally and figuratively. The rhythm of commerce is both frantic and familiar, a dance of supply and demand that would make any modern economist's head spin. Speaking of spinning, wool is big business. It's the medieval equivalent of trading in tech stocks. Your Saxon farmer eyes light up at the sight of a good quality fleece. Wool is not just your winter wardrobe. It's a commodity, one you might barter for goods or services. And barter you do because while pennies are nice, they're not always necessary. Most transactions occur without a single coin changing hands. You might trade your pig for a bolt of cloth or a bushel of wheat. It's a system built on trust and necessity, where the value of goods is as much about need as it is about worth. Now, let's not forget the medieval regulators, the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your perspective of the market. Quality control in this era is less about red tape and more about a guy named Ethelred with a stick. Yes, you heard that right. Ethelred, or someone like him, is the market's enforcer, ensuring that weights and measures are fair, and nobody's trying to pass off subpar wool as top-notch. He's the medieval equivalent of the Better Business Bureau, although his methods are more direct and a bit less bureaucratic. Get caught cheating, and you might find yourself on the wrong end of his stick. It's an incentive to keep your dealings as clean as your conscience, or at least as clean as market conditions allow. The market is more than just a place to buy and sell. It's a social hub, a chance to catch up on the latest news, or gossip, if we're being honest. Information travels faster than you'd think, carried by merchants and travelers, each with a tale to tell. It's through these stories that you hear about the wider world, the battles and betrayals, the fortunes made and lost. In a world where isolation is more the rule than the exception, the market is your window to the wider world, even if that world is just the next village over. Beneath the bustling surface, there's a stark reality. The market is where you're reminded of your place in the social hierarchy. If you're a farmer, you're rubbing shoulders with other farmers, craftsmen, and maybe the occasional merchant. But don't expect to see the local lord haggling over a sheep's worth. He's back at his manor, far removed from the mud and noise, his wealth measured not in pennies, but in land and power. The market is a microcosm of medieval society, a place where economic strata are visible and visceral. Yet there's a romance to it all. The market is where dreams are bought and sold, where a good deal can mean the difference between hardship and comfort. It's a place of potential, of promise, where the humblest farmer can feel like a king with the right bargain. But don't let the romance fool you. Beneath the vibrant tapestry of trade lies a harsh truth. Survival is the name of the game, and you play it with every transaction, every negotiation, every exchange of goods or coin. So as you wander through the market, clutching your precious penny, remember that it's more than just currency. It's a symbol of your labor, your livelihood, and your link to a broader economic web. The market is a living entity, a bustling, breathing testament to human ingenuity and endurance. And as you haggle over that piece of wool, you're doing more than just trading goods. You're participating in a tradition as old as civilization itself, a dance of commerce and culture that weaves together the fabric of history, one transaction at a time. With your business concluded and your hands a little lighter, you take one last look at the market. The day's energy lingers in the air, a reminder of the perpetual motion of life in 9th century Wessex. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps a new penny to spend. But for now, you head home, your mind already turning to the next market day, the next chance to test your wits and your wallet against the bustling backdrop of medieval trade. As you head home from the market, your mind buzzing with the day's haggles and the promise of tomorrow's deals, reality nudges you with a sharp elbow. The sun's dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with the kind of colors you'd appreciate more if you weren't acutely aware of the evening's other pressing task, fortifying your homestead. Because nothing quite says relaxing evening like preparing for potential Viking visits. It's like living in a perpetual state of guess who's coming to dinner, except the guests have axes, and they're not here for the roast. Let's talk defense, the medieval pastime that's less about strategy games and more about staying alive. Your trusty axe, the one you've been using to chop wood and occasionally intimidate the odd stray chicken, doubles as your first line of defense. Forget about a specialized weaponry collection. You're making do with what you've got. And what you've got is a lot of grit and a little bit of edge, literally and figuratively. But you're not alone in this defensive dance. Enter the feared, the medieval equivalent of a neighborhood watch. If your neighborhood watch involved swords and spears, the feared is your local militia, a ragtag band of farmers, craftsmen, and anyone else who can hold a weapon without dropping it. These are the folks you'll rely on when things get dicey. It's a communal effort, a testament to the medieval spirit of we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The feared isn't exactly a crack military unit. Training is sporadic, and equipment is, let's say, varied. You might have a shield made from scavenged wood, while your neighbor's wielding a rusty sword that's seen better days. But what you lack in professional training, you make up for in sheer determination. After all, you're defending your home, your family, and your meager possessions against raiders who see your hard-earned goods as a convenient shopping list. The feared is called up by the local lord, who in turn answers to the king, King Alfred, to be precise. Ah, Alfred the Great, the man, the myth, the monarch. His greatness is something you might question when he's demanding taxes instead of sending a battalion to guard your homestead. But hey, who needs a standing army when you've got taxes to collect, right? It's a lesson in medieval economics. Pay up, or the Vikings might just help themselves to your hard-earned assets. Alfred's got his hands full, to be fair. The Vikings aren't just a pesky problem for you. They've got their sights set on the whole of England. It's like living under the constant threat of a hostile takeover, medieval style. King Alfred's strategy is all about building bars, fortified settlements, across Wessex, a sort of early urban planning mixed with a healthy dose of paranoia. But until those bars are up and running, you're relying on the feared and a lot of luck to keep the peace. And speaking of peace, there's the added pressure of social and political expectations. You're not just a farmer, you're a cog in the grand machine of Alfred's England. Your service in the feared isn't optional. It's a duty, a civic responsibility that comes with living under the king's rule. It's a bit like being drafted into a medieval army, minus the benefits of modern military service. You're expected to drop your plough and pick up a spear whenever duty calls, and duty, it seems, calls quite a bit. But for all the pressures of service, there's a certain camaraderie in the field. You're standing shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, ready to defend what's yours. It's a brotherhood forged in the crucible of necessity, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's strength in unity. And who knows, maybe one day you'll tell tales of your bravery around the hearth, stories of how you stood against the odds, axe in hand, ready to defend your little corner of Wessex. As the last light fades, you take a moment to survey your homestead. It's modest, sure, but it's yours, a testament to your labor and resilience. You're part of a legacy, a chain of Saxon farmers stretching back through the mists of time. Each generation has faced its own challenges, and yours is no different. But for now, you savor the quiet, the calm before the next storm, whether it's a Viking raid or another day of back-breaking work in the fields. The night settles over Wessex like a cloak, the stars blinking into view one by one. You head inside, your mind already on tomorrow's tasks. The field will meet again, the fields will need tending, and the cycle of medieval life will continue. But tonight you rest, your axe within reach, your spirit unbroken. It's a tough life, but it's yours, a life of hard work, communal defense, and the ever-present hope for a better tomorrow. And as you drift off to sleep, you can't help but wonder what the future holds. Will King Alfred's buzz stand the test of time? Will the Fyrd hold fast against the Viking threat? It's a story yet to be written, a tale of courage and survival, a testament to the indomitable Saxon spirit. But for now, you dream of a peaceful dawn, the promise of a new day in 9th century Wessex. As you drift off to sleep, dreaming of a peaceful dawn in 9th century Wessex, the sound of crackling firewood and the murmurs of your family pull you back to the comforting reality of the evening. The hearth is the heart of your home, both literally and figuratively. It's where stories are spun and legends come alive, a medieval Netflix powered by ale and imagination. The flickering fire casts long shadows across the walls, transforming your modest home into a theater of the mind. Tonight, as every night, you gather around the hearth for what might be the best entertainment in medieval Wessex, storytelling. It's not just a pastime. It's a vital social ritual, a way to make sense of a world that often feels as unpredictable as a Saxon summer. Here, the line between myth and reality blurs like the edges of a dream, and that's precisely the point. Let's talk Beowulf, the OG hero story. It's a tale older than your great-grandfather's beard, passed down through generations like a cherished heirloom. As the ale flows, so does the narrative, a story of bravery and beast-slaying that's as much a part of your culture as the bread you bake this morning. But let's not kid ourselves. Beowulf's exploits are a far cry from your daily grind. While he's off battling Grendel, you're battling weeds and weather. Yet these stories serve a purpose beyond mere escapism. They're a reminder of the values you hold dear: courage, honor, and the hope that even the smallest of us can make a difference. Now, about that ale. Forget about popping by the local pub for a pint. You're brewing your own, right here at home. Ale is the medieval multi-tool of beverages. It's your go-to for hydration and a mild buzz, not to mention a safer alternative to drinking water that could give you more than just a stomachache. You're consuming about a gallon a day, but don't worry. It's low in alcohol, more like a hearty liquid bread than anything that'll knock you off your chair. It's a social lubricant, loosening tongues and easing the burdens of the day. But ale isn't just about relaxation. It's also an economic staple, a product of barley, one of your primary crops. Brewing is a skill, a craft as important as any other. It's a reminder that even in the harsh realities of medieval life, there's room for craftsmanship and creativity. And let's not forget, it's an excellent way to preserve grain and keep it from spoiling. A practical solution in a world where nothing goes to waste. As the evening wears on, the stories turn to local legends, tales of knights and knaves, of lost causes and found fortunes. You might hear about King Alfred himself, the man who once burned cakes in a peasant's hut. It's a tale that humanizes the great king, grounding his legacy in humility and fallibility. These stories serve as a powerful social glue, binding you to your community and history. But let's pause and consider the reality behind these legends. The truth is, most of your life isn't spent slaying dragons or winning battles. It's spent farming, trading, and surviving. The stories around the fire are a welcome distraction, a way to inject a bit of magic into the mundane. Yet, they also reflect deeper truths about your world, a world where the boundaries between myth and reality are as fluid as the ale in your cup. As the embers dim and the stories draw to a close, you ponder the legacy of your time. You're living in a period of transition, a time when the seeds of modern England are being sown. King Alfred's efforts to unify the land, his legal reforms, and his promotion of learning and literacy are laying the groundwork for a future that you can only glimpse in dreams. His defense against the Vikings isn't just about preserving land. It's about preserving a way of life, a culture, and a people. Your life, though humble, is a vital thread in this tapestry. Each day you spend in the fields, each night by the fire, you're contributing to the story of Wessex. It's a story of resilience in the face of adversity, of community in the face of chaos. And while you may never see the full impact of your efforts, know that they matter. They're the foundation upon which future generations will build, the echoes of which will resonate long after you've left the fields for good. So as you finally lay your head down to rest, know that your role, however small it may seem, is part of something much larger. The legacy of your time is one of endurance and evolution, of myths that inspire and realities that ground. It's a legacy that, centuries later, will still captivate minds and ignite imaginations, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Saxons and the enduring power of their stories. As you drift into sleep once more, the fire's glow fades, carrying with it the promise of a new day and the hope that tomorrow's stories will be just as rich, just as vital as those told tonight. In the spring of 1770, a 14-year-old girl found herself at the heart of a diplomatic chess game, and her name was Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, but you might know her better as Marie Antoinette. Yes, that's right, the infamous queen whose name practically became synonymous with "Oops, I spent all your money." But before we get to the cake and the revolution, let's rewind a bit. Born in Austria, Marie Antoinette was one of 16 children of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Francis I. Her childhood was filled with music, dance, and a liberal sprinkling of political strategy, yet little could prepare her for the whirlpool that was the French court. Fast forward to May 16, 1770, and Marie Antoinette is marrying Louis Auguste, the future Louis Roman XVI of France. Their wedding's price tag, a jaw-dropping 2 million livres. That's like someone throwing the most extravagant royal bash today with a budget that could fund a small country. The wedding had everything, a 57-course dinner, thousands of candles, and even a public fireworks display, because nothing says "I do" like pyrotechnics. But beneath the glitter and glam, this union was less about romance and more about politics. Austria and France wanted to strengthen their alliance, and what better way than to tie a teenage princess to a future king? Now, Marie Antoinette wasn't exactly thrilled about leaving her home. Who would be, when the trade-off is the stress of French court life? The French had a knack for making everything a protocol nightmare. Even greeting someone was an intricate dance of bows and curtsies. The young Archduchess quickly realized that fitting in at Versailles was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while blindfolded. And let's not forget the language barrier. French might be the language of love, but for Marie, it was more like the language of "what did you just say?" Her arrival in France was met with intense scrutiny. The French court was a hotbed of intrigue, gossip, and very sharp elbows. Marie Antoinette had to navigate this social minefield with the grace of a ballerina and the precision of a chess grandmaster. But spoiler alert, not everyone was rooting for her. Many saw her as an outsider, a foreigner who would never truly belong. And here's a plot twist for you. Marie Antoinette wasn't actually the big spender she's often painted as. Sure, she enjoyed a shopping spree now and then, but who doesn't when they're stressed? The real culprit behind France's financial woes was, drumroll please, the country's own mismanagement and costly wars, not her wardrobe. Yet the moniker, Madame Deficit, stuck like a bad nickname in middle school. In reality, Marie Antoinette had very little political power. She was a queen in title, but not in influence. Louis Roman XVI, despite his own indecisiveness, held the reins, and she found herself often sidelined. Her attempts to engage in politics were met with resistance, and she quickly learned that in the court of public opinion, she was an easy scapegoat. Marie Antoinette's early years in France were a whirlwind of trying to fit in. She was a teenage girl thrust into the limelight, expected to produce heirs and navigate court politics with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat. Despite her best efforts, She was often seen as frivolous and out of touch. But beneath the powdered wigs and silk dresses was a young woman caught in a web of expectations and misunderstandings. So the next time you hear the name Marie Antoinette, remember she was more than just a fashion icon or a misunderstood quote about cake. She was a symbol of an era when alliances were forged through marriage, and a nation's fate could rest on the shoulders of a young girl trying to find her place in the world. Marie Antoinette's transition from Austria to the opulent halls of Versailles was like moving from a cozy cottage into a glittering, ceaselessly ticking clockwork palace. Life at Versailles was a spectacle, a 24/7 theater of excess where the curtains never closed. The palace itself was an architectural marvel, sprawling across 67,000 square meters with about 300 rooms. You could get lost faster than a tourist without Google Maps and never reappear. The gardens alone stretched over 800 hectares, meticulously manicured to impress visiting dignitaries, and let's be honest, to flaunt the unimaginable wealth of the French crown. Once inside, Marie was thrust into a world where everyone seemed to be playing the most intense game of who's the fairest of them all. The competition was fierce, and Marie had a reputation to uphold, partly because she was expected to outshine everyone, and partly because those silk dresses didn't come cheap. Her wardrobe was the stuff of legend, or infamy, depending on whom you asked. She reportedly spent 120,000 livres annually on clothing, a sum that would make even the most die-hard fashionista clutch their pearls. But let's not forget, fashion was Marie's armor in the relentless battle of Versailles' catwalks. Yet amidst this sartorial splendor, France was sinking into economic quicksand. The national debt was skyrocketing faster than a firework at a wedding. By the late 1780, it had ballooned to over 4 billion livres. France was like a gambler on a losing streak, throwing money at wars and lavish parties in hopes of a win that never came. The American Revolution was a particularly pricey affair, costing France around 1.3 billion livres, a noble cause, sure, but one that didn't exactly pay dividends for the French peasantry. And speaking of gambling, Marie wasn't one to shy away from a card game or two. Her fondness for gambling was well documented, with evenings spent at the card tables in the Petit Trianon, her personal retreat. She wasn't alone. Gambling was as much a social activity as it was a financial risk. Think of it as the 18th century version of scrolling your favorite social media app, a way to escape the pressures of daily life, except with slightly higher stakes. While she may have racked up some debts, it's worth noting that her personal spending was a drop in the bucket compared to the financial tidal wave crashing over France. Now, Marie wasn't just a one-dimensional party queen, despite what her critics might say. She was a complex figure navigating a nuanced role. The stereotype of the frivolous queen often overshadows her charitable endeavors. She donated generously to various causes, including hospitals and orphanages, and she was known to care deeply for children. It's like finding out your high school nemesis secretly volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend. Unexpected, but it adds layers to the narrative. Unfortunately, these acts of kindness were often eclipsed by the political and social constraints of her position. She was a queen in a gilded cage, with limited power and a public eager to blame her for the nation's woes. In the public imagination, she became the face of the monarchy's excesses, a convenient scapegoat for systemic failures. The infamous "let them eat cake" line, which she likely never uttered, symbolized the disconnect between her world and the bread riots outside the palace gates. It was a catchy soundbite in a time when soundbites spread via word of mouth rather than Twitter. So here we have Marie, living in a world of dazzling chandeliers and diamond-encrusted snuff boxes, while just beyond the palace walls, bread prices soared and discontent simmered. The French populace was not amused by the royal fashion shows or the extravagant soirees. They were more concerned with feeding their families and surviving another harsh winter. The contrast was stark, and the stage was set for what would become a dramatic and revolutionary chapter in French history. Marie Antoinette's story at Versailles is a tapestry of luxury and limitation, where the threads of myth and reality are so tightly woven that unraveling them is no small feat. She was a queen caught between her own humanity and the monstrous expectations of an entire nation. As we continue to explore her life, remember that she was both a product and a prisoner of her time. a symbol of a world on the brink of monumental change. And as we pause here, with the echoes of her footsteps fading down the marble corridors of Versailles, just know that the next act in this historical drama is about to unfold with all the intensity of a storm gathering on the horizon. Now, as the storm clouds of history gather, let's dive into the rising tide of public discontent that took Marie Antoinette from a misunderstood foreign princess to a full-blown villain in the eyes of the French populace. It's the classic tale of she said, they said, except with a bit more guillotine and a lot less social media. Though make no mistake, 18th century, France had its own version of viral content, pamphlets and gossip. Public opinion of Marie Antoinette was like a seesaw, but by the late 1780, the only thing going up was the vitriol directed at her. France was neck-deep in debt, and fingers were pointed faster than you can say, economic scapegoat. The country was financially strapped, with the national debt hovering around an astronomical 4 billion livres. The government's attempt to fix this mess was akin to trying to plug a leaky dam with a wine cork. Enter the pamphleteers, the bloggers and YouTubers of their day, except their platforms were paper and ink. These pamphlets were the tabloids of the time, painting Marie as Madame Deficit and accusing her of draining the national treasury to fund her luxurious lifestyle. One popular myth that emerged from this frenzy was the infamous "let them eat cake" line. Spoiler alert, she likely never uttered those words. The phrase actually dates back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, written when Marie was just a child. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good story? The line was just too juicy to resist, epitomizing the supposed disconnect between the crown and the common folk. It was a soundbite tailor-made for the angry mob. The French public was hungry for change, both metaphorically and literally. Bread prices had skyrocketed, with a loaf costing nearly a week's wages for a laborer. The people were fed up with empty promises and empty bellies, and Marie, with her extravagant reputation, was an easy target. It didn't help that she had a penchant for private retreats like the Petit Trianon, which to the struggling masses looked like Marie was playing house while they played survival. As if the economic turmoil wasn't enough, Marie's reputation took another hit with the diamond necklace affair. This scandal was like a soap opera with gemstones. It all started when a con artist, posing as a confidante of the Queen, tricked a cardinal into buying a 800-carat diamond necklace for Marie. She never received the necklace, but the affair left her reputation in tatters. The public saw her as the mastermind behind the scheme, a perception more fiction than fact. The scandal was the perfect storm of deceit, luxury, and royal intrigue, juicy enough to grab headlines and keep them. But behind the glittering facade and the tabloid tales was a woman with her own struggles. Marie was a mother, fiercely protective of her children, striving to give them what she never had, a sense of normalcy. Her letters reveal a woman deeply concerned for her family and their future, belying the image of a detached sovereign. Was also attempting to wield some influence in politics, though with limited success. Her efforts to guide Louis Roman XVI policies were met with resistance, her counsel often sidelined in favor of more traditional male advisors. She was like a chess player, seeing moves ahead, but always blocked by the king. Despite these efforts, Marie's public image was increasingly toxic. It was a classic case of perception versus reality, and reality was losing the PR battle. The court of Versailles was a crucible of rumors, and Marie's foreign origins made her a perpetual outsider, an easy target for nationalist sentiments brewing in the air. Her Austrian heritage was weaponized against her, casting her as an enemy within. The gossip was relentless, painting her not just as extravagant, but also as morally corrupt. It was like a historical game of telephone, where truths and half-truths were mixed into a potent cocktail of character assassination. And yet, Marie was far from the sole architect of France's downfall. The monarchy's financial woes were a tangled web woven over decades, with roots in costly wars and mismanagement rather than a penchant for couture. But nuance rarely wins in the court of public opinion. The French Revolution was brewing, and Marie's image as the frivolous queen was the perfect kindling for the revolutionary fire. In the end, Marie Antoinette became a symbol, not just of excess, but of the inevitable crash course between old-world monarchy and the new winds of change. She was a real person caught in the gears of historical forces far beyond her control, her story a cautionary tale of how quickly fortunes can turn in the tide of public opinion. As we pause here in our tale, remember that Marie's journey is far from over. The storm is gathering strength, and the next act promises to be even more tumultuous as the revolutionaries are about to take center stage. Hang on, because this historical roller coaster is just picking up speed. As the revolutionary storm gathered force, Marie Antoinette's life began to feel like she was walking a tightrope, balancing on a thread that was about to snap. Enter July 14, 1789, Bastille Day. Now, if you imagine the storming of the Bastille as a colossal showdown, you'd be half right. The Bastille was no Alcatraz. It had been a political prison with only 7 inmates at the time, including a couple of forgers and a mad aristocrat. But to the revolutionaries, it was the symbol of royal tyranny, like smashing the piggy bank of oppression to pieces. The fall of the Bastille was less about who was inside and more about what it represented. A giant stone middle finger to the monarchy. And while the Bastille itself crumbled, so did the illusion of the monarchy's untouchability. The event sent shockwaves through France, and Marie felt them even from her gilded cage in Versailles. The winds of change were blowing, and they carried the odor of revolution, a mix of sweat, smoke, and simmering resentment. But the revolution wasn't just about demolishing prisons. It was about bread and survival. Enter the Women's March on Versailles, October 1789. Picture thousands of women, armed with whatever they could find, pitchforks, broomsticks, rolling pins, marching the 20 kilometers from Paris to Versailles. Their demand was simple: bread. Bread that had become a luxury item due to skyrocketing grain prices. Bread that symbolized life itself. When they reached Versailles, they weren't interested in the grandeur or the mirrors. They were there to confront the royals and demand action. Marie and Louis found themselves on the receiving end of this anger. The Queen famously addressed the crowd, not with a dismissive wave, but with an attempt at empathy. She stood on a balcony, supposedly in the same dress she wore for church, and faced the crowd. But the connection was lost in translation. People saw not a queen, but a symbol of everything wrong with their world. Their demands were loud and clear, and the monarchy had no choice but to comply. The royal family was escorted back to Paris, essentially under house arrest in the Tuileries Palace. The days of Versailles as a royal playground were over. Caught in the revolutionary riptide, Marie Antoinette's role shifted from that of a queen to a mother fiercely protective of her family. Her political acumen kicked into high as she tried to navigate the treacherous waters of revolutionary politics. But her attempts to secure her family's safety were like playing chess against opponents who kept flipping the board. She reached out to her brother, Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II, and other foreign powers, hoping they could help restore the monarchy or at least provide a safe haven. However, these secret correspondences proved to be a double-edged sword. While Marie was trying to play the Game of Thrones, her actions were perceived as treasonous by the revolutionaries. The revolution was not just a French affair. It was a European spectacle, watched with bated breath by monarchs across the continent. Marie's attempts to rally foreign support only confirmed the revolutionaries' worst fears, that she was a traitor in their midst, conspiring with other monarchies to quash their hard-won freedom. The irony was palpable. Marie, once a pawn in the diplomatic game, was now accused of masterminding a counter-revolutionary conspiracy. Her letters, which were intended to save her family, became her undoing. It's the kind of plot twist that would make Shakespeare proud, with all the tragic inevitability of a Greek drama. As the political noose tightened, Louis Roman XVI found himself increasingly indecisive, a king in name, but not in action. Marie, on the other hand, was more resolute. She pushed for escape plans, hoping to reach loyalist strongholds where they could regroup and reclaim their power. But these plans were as doomed as the monarchy itself. The most infamous attempt, the flight to Varennes in June 1791, was a fiasco of epic proportions. Disguised and traveling under the cover of night, the royal family made a break for it, but their escape was thwarted when they were recognized and captured. It was like a Keystone Cops routine, minus the humor and with the stakes of life and death. The failed escape only fueled the revolutionaries' resolve. It confirmed their suspicions and solidified Marie's image as an enemy of the state. The wheels of revolution were not just turning, they were grinding down the old regime with relentless force. The National Assembly, having declared a constitutional monarchy, now saw it as an anachronism. The people's trust, already frayed, was now irreparably torn. Marie's life, once filled with the opulence of Versailles, was now confined to the suffocating walls of the Tuileries. Her world had shrunk dramatically, and with it, her influence. Yet even in her reduced circumstances, she remained a complex figure. Her story was no longer just a cautionary tale of excess, but a study of resilience in the face of historical upheaval. She was a woman who, despite her flaws and missteps, faced her fate with a dignity that belied the caricature of Madame Deficit. As the revolution gained momentum, Marie's position became increasingly untenable. The revolutionary government, needing to consolidate power, saw her as a convenient scapegoat. After all, nothing unites a populace like a common enemy, and Marie Antoinette fit the bill perfectly. Her story, once a glittering tale of a young queen's life at Versailles, was now a sobering narrative of survival and sacrifice. And so, as we pause in this chapter of her life, the stage is set for the next act. The revolutionaries have taken center stage, and Marie, once the queen of one of the most powerful nations on earth, is now a prisoner in a world she barely recognizes. Her fate, and that of the monarchy, hangs in the balance as the tide of revolution rises ever higher. Stay tuned, because the final chapters of Marie Antoinette's life promise to be as dramatic and poignant as the history that has unfolded so far. As Marie Antoinette faced the encroaching storm of revolution, it seemed like the sun was setting on an era of powdered wigs and gilded palaces. The queen, once the dazzling centerpiece of Versailles' opulent theatre, was now confined to the dreary stage of the Tuileries, where the backdrop was more revolution than revelry. Things were about to get Shakespearean, and not in a romantic comedy kind of way. In 1792, the political temperature in France was hotter than a midsummer day, and the heat was about to reach boiling point. The royal family's attempted escape to Varennes had already made Marie a villain in the revolutionary narrative. The monarchy was officially abolished in September 1792, and the royal family was imprisoned in the Temple, a medieval fortress that was less castle in the clouds and more house of horrors. The clock was ticking, and Marie's life was spinning out of her control faster than a spinning wheel in Rumpelstiltskin's workshop. By January 1793, Louis Roman XVI had met the guillotine, a grim contraption that had become the revolution's favorite tool for equalizing society. King's execution was like the ultimate mic drop of the revolution, a declaration that the old order was dead. But the revolutionaries weren't done yet. They had their sights set on Marie, the Austrian she-wolf, as the pamphleteers fondly called her. Her trial was inevitable, a tragic denouement that was more theatrical than judicious. Marie's trial began on October 14, 1793, and it was a spectacle worthy of any courtroom drama. The charges were as diverse as they were dubious: treason, conspiracy, and even incest, which was as preposterous as accusing a cat of being a dog. The tribunal was less about justice and more about satisfying the public's thirst for royal blood. In court, Marie defended herself with a dignity that belied her dire circumstances. When accused of incest with her son, she delivered a retort that silenced the courtroom. "If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to answer such a charge made against a mother." But despite her eloquent defense, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. On October 16, 1793, Marie was led to the guillotine. Her hair was shorn, her hands bound, and her carriage ride through Paris was nothing short of a public humiliation parade. As she mounted the scaffold, Marie accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot and murmured, "Pardon me, sir, I meant not to do it," a final act of grace under the blade of fate. Marie Antoinette's execution marked the end of an era, but it was also the beginning of a myth. Her life and death became the stuff of legend, a tale told and retold through the centuries. Romanticized as the tragic queen, Marie's story became a canvas onto which generations projected their own narratives about power, excess, and downfall. Was she the frivolous fashionista who fiddled while France burned, or the scapegoat for a nation's systemic failures? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the messy middle. For the revolutionaries, Marie was a convenient symbol of everything wrong with the ancient regime. She was the foreign queen, the outsider whose luxurious lifestyle made her the poster child for royal excess. And while it's true she had a weakness for wigs and a penchant for parties. Marie was not the mastermind of France's financial ruin. The seeds of that disaster had been sown long before her arrival, in the costly wars and fiscal mismanagement that left the nation perpetually in the red. Yet, Marie's legacy is more than just a cautionary tale of excess. It's a reminder of the power of myth-making, the way stories can be spun to serve agendas and shape perceptions. Her infamous, "let them eat cake" line, which she never uttered, continues to symbolize the disconnect between the rulers and the ruled, a catchy phrase that outlived the Queen herself. It's a testament to the enduring appeal of a good soundbite, even if it's historically dubious. In modern times, Marie has been resurrected in countless retellings, from movies to books, each adding their own gloss to her legend. She's become a pop culture icon, the ultimate it girl of history, her image as much a fashion statement as a historical figure. For all the romanticizing, her story remains a sobering lesson about the fragility of power and the fickleness of public opinion. It's a narrative that resonates today, in a world where the court of public opinion is as influential as ever, albeit with hashtags instead of headscarves. As we look back on Marie Antoinette's life, it's tempting to cast her as either villain or victim. But perhaps the truth is she was both, and neither. She was a queen caught in the torrent of history, a woman who played her part on a stage far grander than she ever imagined. Her story is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the lives of real people, each contributing their own thread to the grand design. In the end, Marie Antoinette's life and death left an indelible mark on French history, a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire. She was a product of her time, but also a prisoner of it, her fate sealed by forces far beyond her control. As we close the book on her story, let's remember her not just as the queen who lost her head, but as a complex figure navigating a world in upheaval. Her life may have been cut short, but her legend endures, a testament to the enduring power of myth and the lessons it holds for us all.